It's the 26th day of July, 2015, and this is the Radical Agnostic, the place where ideology goes to die. I'm your host, I'm John. Mark's not here yet, but he will be. Stowaway guest on mic number 4, Brian Richter, everybody.
Hola.
I'm very honored to present our guest today. He is a Master Sargent in the U.S. Army, Brian Varble. Thank you for coming to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me, sir.
My pleasure. I've been waiting for this one for a while because, like so many people in this country, I am somewhat relatively isolated as far as my social group with people. I'm surrounded by people that agree with me generally, like on Facebook and in my social life, and I don't even know that you and I really disagree that much about anything. But you are, you can be described as a conservative guy.
Sure.
So in that sense, we are different. But so we'll kind of figure out exactly where we differ today. Probably we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about the nuclear deal between Iran and the P5+1, which is those 6 powerful countries that were on our side, basically, and trying to curb Iran's nuclear development. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about a couple things that I've been wrong about. Is that Mark?
Yep.
We're going to pause. Hold on. All right, we're back, and we're also going to talk about a couple things that I've been wrong about generally on my rants in recent shows, especially about the history of liberalism and political history in the Western world in general. We're going to talk about the minimum wage, if we get to it, which I hope we will. And what else? That's about it. But I'm sure we'll not cover any of that and cover 10 other things. So... But let's begin with just introducing our guest to the world here. Brian, you are... tell us about your career with the military. Just briefly overview when you enlisted and the progress that you made and where you ended up.
Okay. I'm a retired Master Sargent. I was in the Army for 22 years. Joined when I was 20. After high school, I went to community college for a little while. And... I entered community college with the intention of joining the military after attaining a degree, so it was always in the cards to do it anyway.
So you were kind of looking at OCS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Kind of what Nick Richardson did. He obtained his degree and then went to OCS.
Actually, can I interrupt you for just a second here and ask you, because this has been a big thing we talked about in early episodes, what was your motivation for joining the Army? And if it was too many things and vague, feel free to say so. But I've always wondered, is it the desire for action? Is it the desire for, is it straight up old-fashioned patriotism? These are the questions that I can't answer, but that I wonder.
It's kind of an all of the above thing.
Yeah,
I would say first and foremost, a testosterone-driven 20-year-old who wanted to jump out of airplanes and shoot guns and blow things up and do that. With regard to patriotism, I was raised in a family where all my grandparents and great-uncles served during World War II.
Right.
I had another grandfather who served in the Korean War. He was a career officer, retired as a major. And my father served in the Navy during the Vietnam War. And it was just something that was always part of the family. It's something I've always been around. Mm-hmm. You geek out as a kid in movies you like, and some people like cop movies, some people like military movies. Right. I was always into the Army kind of stuff. So joined the Army, age 20. I was an infantryman for about 5.5 years. Bounced around quite a bit.
What year was this?
1990.
Okay.
Very interesting. So, first day in the Army was August 1st, 1990.
Was that...
Woke up the second day of August 2nd, and basically we were told we were going to war with Iraq.
Yeah.
So
you're like, hell yes.
Yeah. That was a very interesting time because it was about a year after, almost a year after the invasion of Panama. Grenada had only been a few years prior to that, and everybody had this mindset that, there's no more big wars. It's going to be these small little things.
Well, some people even look at Panama and stuff as like a completely needless military exercise.
Yeah.
To see what our shit could do, basically, because we had all this new stuff.
If you're familiar with it, it was the official name of that was Operation Just Cause.
Just Cause, yeah.
And unofficially known throughout the circles I ran in the Army as Operation Just Because.
Yeah, Just Cause.
So, there's a lot of here we go. I'm probably the first one to start going off on a tangent.
Okay.
So I remember as a kid watching Saturday Night Live, and I can't remember who was doing the impression of Ronald Reagan, but it was he was lowering. The skit was generally that Reagan was lowering taxes, but he was raising funds to do small invasions, and he was projecting the success in Grenada. And he was like, now pick a small country so we can win.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the skit, and I wish I could pull it out. But I'm going to see if I can find it on YouTube somewhere. So anyway, I served in Germany. I went to the Persian Gulf War at the time. Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I didn't really see a lot of action.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot.
I don't think there was much in the way of infantry.
Yeah.
There's
a lot of tank. No, it's Where do these tank?
Well, the tanks were actually Iraq's, and then we basically blew them up with planes.
Well, we had tanks too.
They had some. They sent some tanks in too, but I don't even know how much fighting they saw.
Oh, we did a lot.
Actually, a lot. It was yeah. So I was in 1st Armored Division, which was primarily a mechanized armor. So the infantry units in an armored division.
Where's first from?
At the time, it was in the headquarters was in Nuremberg, Germany.
Oh no shit.
And now they have some. The organization of the Army has changed so much over the past few decades.
I just wondered where it was.
They have some units at Fort Bliss, and that's about as much as I know. Okay. But there was actually a massive armor.
Present.
Exercise, but the thing, you're absolutely correct. They pounded him with air for almost a month, and what happened was there was a buffer of Iraqi armor along the border of Kuwait, and the big feint was the Marines basically pushing through near the border, near Kuwait. And I was part of 7th Corps, which was an armor corps, essentially based out of Germany. And
that's the league I played in over there as a dependent youth kid with 7th Corps.
And so were you around the Stuttgart area?
Stuttgart, Munich, Augsburg, it was all 7th Corps.
And so there's a massive kind of right hook, they called it, where basically my numbers might be off a bit, but about, we had about 3 armored divisions and 1 mechanized infantry division kind of push in from that direction. And the units that really fought on the ground from the Iraqis were the Republican Guard. The more elite, the better equipped, but the run-of-the-mill line units of the Iraqi army were destroyed by air power before we even went in there.
Because I went to a military high school. It was a JROTC high school, and we had Lieutenant Colonel Russell was the head of the military science. It was also a Catholic high school, which I didn't realize at the time was a very weird combination because Catholics are pacifists. Right. But Lieutenant Colonel Russell was there, and he was a veteran from Iraq, and he was a tank commander. And he basically described it as, I think he was involved in the highway of death, basically. So he was shelling fleeing people on a highway. Yeah. And they were just going there. They would just shell them from like a mile, however far those guns can shoot. And then they'd drive up and like count the corpses and stuff.
The gulf in technology was amazing. Yeah. And the thing about it at the time, before that, I just entered the Army. I was a private. And, it's kind of the waning of the Cold War was kind of ending. And, the Soviet Union still existed. And so at the time, they weren't necessarily an ally, but they were not opposed to our.
They were just powerless, basically.
Really, yeah.
They were disassembling.
Exactly.
Yeah. So did you ride in a armored vehicle?
I was I was actually a driver for a logistics lieutenant. So I was an infantryman, but I wound up getting put into this hodgepodge task force, which was it was called the Pony Express. And it was actually attached to a division main support battalion, and so we had it was just an amalgam of people of different MOSs, military occupational specialties, so different jobs within the Army. Mm-hmm. So I was with a quartermaster lieutenant, a artillery National Guardsman from New Mexico, with a what was he? He was I think a mechanic staff sergeant, and so the four of us were a little team
and driving around.
Part of this group called the Pony Express, and so what this was is what we were supposed to be guides along a logistics channel to push what they call log packs, logistic packs of food, fuel, ammunition from support bases into the fighting troops in the front. Mm-hmm. So in other words, the tanks and the mechanized infantry that are fighting in 1st Armored Division, we were to guide these logistics packages from waypoint to waypoint up to the troops fighting. And so we established these series of what they called way stations. So basically it's like you're putting waypoints in your GPS. And the interesting thing is we actually had GPSs, and it was emerging technology. We had Magellans, which were it was designed for boats.
Okay.
But it fit in the wasteland of
the
southern
desert.
Iraq there, which was just, there was no terrain features. And
just go towards the sand.
Yeah.
Over the next dune.
Yeah.
So you saw a little bit of like, did you take some fire there? Or?
Well, no, not really. I mean, we came in the proximity of things going off in the distance, but I wouldn't describe any. I mean, especially the combat experience later on, there was nothing.
Yeah.
There was nothing I experienced in Iraq that I would significantly say I was really in danger or anything like that.
So that war wound down rather quickly, and then you
surprisingly
continued.
So.
Yeah. And then what did you?
In fact, the Pony Express never really materialized because there was about a 72-hour objective to attain a certain position inside Iraq for 1st Armored Division. It reached it in the first 24 hours.
Right.
So basically, our guiding of this logistics package was following in this rut in the sand, and without stopping, basically for the whole 96 hours.
Wow.
And I literally fell asleep at the wheel of this Humvee, and it didn't really matter because the whole thing is moving.
It's on a desert.
Yeah, we're
It didn't really matter.
No.
Just like I tied the wheel to the shifter so that it wouldn't turn.
We would stop and take a leak and eat, and fuel would push up, and mechanics would fix stuff, and all that stuff would go on. But the lieutenant and I would switch off, but I remember just the ruts were dug so deep into the sand.
Oh, yeah.
And we're in this huge convoy. I mean, there's hundreds of vehicles. And so we're just crawling along at like 15 miles an hour and falling asleep and waking up because my hands are on the wheel and the wheels are bouncing off the ruts in the sand. They're just waking me up. So
nice.
that was my big war there.
Yeah.
But
so then that wound down and you continued along in the middle. You were thinking of having a career then. You weren't going to leave after your 4 years.
So initially I wanted to do what I was initially looking at was going into the Ranger Regiment. And I didn't. I decided not to. I was actually I was dating a girl when I was in college, and she got pregnant. Mm-hmm. And because I impregnated her,
right? Yeah, it wasn't just immaculate.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, immaculate conception.
Immaculate. No.
That kind of fast forwarded my decision to enlist earlier, and also she was apprehensive about me doing anything like Rangers, and so I kind of was like, I'll go infantry, and I'll still kind of be an action guy, but not
to that extent.
Yeah, and over time, it worked out the way most relationships that start that way do. I mean, it's we divorced, we married and then divorced, and early on I had resentment that I should have done what I did, and she held me back and all this other stuff.
Right.
Really what it was is it's young people getting themselves into situations that.
And she was probably trying to look out for the well-being of the family and not getting you shot, right?
Well, looking back at it now, we were two immature people that got in over our heads that tried to make the best of a situation.
Yeah, it sounds like you acted maturely,
Yeah, well, and put it in fast forward. I don't know if I would have attained that maturity as quickly if it had not been in that situation. But so I had this desire. So my first tour in the Army was 3 years, and I did not attain what I set out to do, and I wanted more. Mm-hmm. And so I re-enlisted. I wound up going to Korea, which was Korea's a love or hate place. It's kind of it's a bit. Well, first of all, you're thousands of miles from home in a different culture, and
you were single, so it was on a company.
Yeah,
2 years.
So I was freshly divorced.
Was it 2 years on the company?
It was 1 year at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fluctuated over the years. It's gone from 18 months to 2 years back down to 1.
South Korea is another, like Germany, another place where there's a huge U.S. military presence.
Yes, and it's a bit different because you're in the proximity of North Korean artillery.
Right.
We do active alerts there, and it's a type of place you get lulled into thinking, it'll never happen, but it can happen.
They have nukes.
They were developing them while I was there. It was very interesting. I was there in 1994. Kim Il-sung, who was the premier of North Korea since the end of World War II.
Oh, so this was the grandfather of the current guy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So at any rate, he died when I was there.
Okay.
And so there was no clear picture of what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so we went on alert. We're like, you don't know what rogue is going to take control of the government.
Yeah.
And then Kim Jong-il was followed in Daddy's footsteps.
Yeah.
We had a scout helicopter have mechanical failure that drifted over the border and land in North Korean territory. One pilot was killed, another one was captured.
Yeah.
And there was no hostile fire or anything like that. It was just purely mechanical failure. But, I mean, it's tracing along the demilitarized zone, and it...
Man, they could have easily used that as a false flag to get us into a war with them.
Absolutely. And so we went on alert for that. That was a huge year for proliferation concerns for nukes. They didn't have any nukes that were deployable, developed yet. Jimmy Carter actually came over for a summit with them at the time. We were on alert while that was going on. I mean, so all those types of things were happening, and if you're not there and it's a 15-second soundbite on the news, you don't get the.
It's just another abstraction.
But for the Korean, for the South Koreans, I mean, this is the biggest thing going on in the world at the time.
Yeah.
And to be a U.S. troop there, 7,000 miles from home, and your job is to shoot guys when they start streaming over the border. If that's what happens, it's a different perspective. So
you guys were ready to fight a tank land and air battle?
I was in a light infantry unit there. So basically, Korea is a very hilly and mountainous terrain, and so the overall mission there was the mechanized and armor forces are to control lines of communication, roads, valleys, protect cities, and when the time comes, actually go up those lines of communication and take terrain in North Korea. Mm-hmm. The unit I was in, we were an air assault light infantry battalion. Our job was to take the high ground to make sure that it was clear for the mechanized and armor forces to travel along those valley roads so that they are not hit with anti-tank and anti-armor type weapons.
Okay.
And so it was a different mission than I had than the unit that I was in Germany.
So by this time you're 20-something. You've already had two different historically significant conflicts.
Yeah.
You've been in very different parts of the world, different enemies.
Yeah.
So then what happened after that? And when did you get your sergeant stripes?
I was before I went to Korea. I was in another mechanized unit in Fort Riley, Kansas, the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One of fame.
Fame,
World War II, World War I, World War II, Vietnam. I mean, they've been in every significant conflict of the 20th and 21st century. Unfortunately, they were in Fort Riley, Kansas, which was my least favorite duty station.
I lived in Kansas for a bit,
and
it's kind of a wasteland.
The other thing about that period of time was it was the Cold War had ended, and there was a significant reduction in force. We just, the Persian Gulf War, the masterstroke of the culmination of the 24th century. Oh, our technology is so superior, nobody ever dare fight us again. And, the emphasis, we just had this big specter of the Cold War diminish right before our very eyes. I would just say that we were just kind of there. We would train, we would do stuff, but and
there was a big shrinkage of the military during the Clinton years, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you cut a lot of.
It started with Bush.
Okay.
It started with the
Graham Rudman way back when they started closing bases, and that was in the 80s.
Yeah, but and the writing was on the wall. I mean, a lot of people didn't really pick up on it, but towards with the Star Wars stuff and the SALT II talks and all that kind of stuff, I mean, the writing was on the wall. They were on the downward spiral, and certain people anticipated it. And what some folks were doing was looking for a way to, now we can start reducing forces. There's some good reasons for doing it. There's some better ways of doing it that we did it. But basically, when H.W. Bush declared a new world order and we started reducing forces, to put it in perspective, there were more troops, there were more U.S. Army troops in Germany when I showed up for duty in 1990 than there are in the entire U.S. Army right now.
Really?
Yeah. And that was approximately a third of our Army at the time.
Wow. That's surprising to me because of these two wars and everything.
Yeah. No, we have, I think the Army is at least half the size it was.
Wow. But expenditures on defense are through the roof.
Yeah.
Well, he's saying Army.
No, I know.
Not military completely. Not the whole entire military.
The Navy probably retains about the same size. The Navy and Air Force are probably around the same size.
Okay. But the spending is higher because of the technology, the drones.
Right.
And
Yeah,
they're not giving that money to the soldiers.
No.
Yeah. That didn't get divvied up to the guys with their boots on the ground.
So moving right along then, the 2000s come, 9/11.
Yeah. So just I made a significant change in my career in 1996.
Okay.
I went to I entered into Special Forces then.
Okay.
So I got that action
So now
thing I was looking for.
So you had to go through another sort of boot camp training for that?
There's an assessment and selection that you go through, and then there's a qualification course that you go through, and it's pretty significant stuff. I mean, it's
what are some of the hardest things you had to do for that?
Not quit.
Yeah. But specifically, like,
I would say physically, the assessment and selection course is a physical monster. I mean, you're doing long distance running, long distance rucksack marches with heavy loads in a backpack. I would say there's certain assessment exercises where within a team you're given a bunch of equipment, and you have to assemble certain carrying devices for it and carry you've got 3 20-foot metal poles and 2 duffel bags full of sand and a bunch of rope.
So a MacGyver test,
get this from point A to point
Yeah.
B in the next hour and a half. Oh, that's 6 miles. Let's go.
Start running.
Yeah. And so I mean, it was challenging in that manner. But I mean, to be I was a 25-year-old at the time in top physical condition, you suck it up. You know, I mean, so as far as that goes, it was physically rigorous, but the mental rigor
You question, like, is this worth it? What am I doing here?
I would say for the physical portion. So the assessment and selection course was very physical, and I was committed. It's like, if they don't want me, they can remove me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to quit.
Right.
I'll fall down dead, and you can pick my body up and throw it, but I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to leave here voluntarily.
Yeah.
And you got miserable weather, freezing rain. You're sleeping out in that crap. And then when you first, just to talk about the qualification course a little bit so people understand what it is. In Army Special Forces, primarily for the enlisted, there's 4 main MOSs that you go through the qualification course for. There's a weapons specialist, engineer specialist, medical specialist, and communication specialist. And I was a medical specialist, which is the longest and most academically arduous one for obvious reasons. I mean, you're dealing with some challenging subjects and taking care of people. But everybody gets common training in small unit tactics, in air operations, in unconventional warfare, things like that. So, I mean, it doesn't matter that you're a medic, you still need to know how to lead a platoon in an ambush or a raid.
Okay.
You still need to know how to operate a mortar and a machine gun.
Yeah.
So I mean that's that common level of cross training. It doesn't matter. You can't just say, "No, I'm in the engineer. I just deal with demolitions and construction." No, you're a special forces soldier.
Okay.
You need to.
Everyone has to be able to fight.
Yeah, exactly.
And do their thing. So this was all in Kansas that you did this training?
No. This was all in North Carolina.
Okay.
So Kansas just put it in the timeline. Germany, Kansas, Korea. Back to Georgia, where basic training was for me, but I went to Georgia, another mechanized unit there. That's where I met my wife. Maybe I'll talk about that later. But which was awesome. I met my wife, and then I went into Special Forces, and then like life, I'm on this high gliding path. I mean, everything's great. I'm currently married to Shannon. My previous marriage I discussed ended when I was in Korea, actually. So, at any rate. So the qualification course, the first chunk of it is small unit tactics training. The middle of it is where you get your specialty. And being a medic, our training as medics is about a year. And at the end, all the MOSs, all the specialties come back together and form into student teams. And we do unconventional warfare training. And that's when we do an exercise called Robin Sage. Which is a mock guerrilla warfare exercise. It's very interesting. It's something to talk about sometime when I can go into detail of. It's a mock country with a mock situation.
Oh.
We talked about this on the way from the range one day. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
sounds like fun.
There's soldiers. There's an enemy forces, which at the time was highly trained airborne infantry unit that was out hunting us down.
Yeah. Do you have like paintball guns or something?
No. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you don't. It's logistically challenging, but if you're going to be in like close proximity and take down a building or something, we use what's called non-lethal training ammunition, simunitions, which is like paintball on steroids. It'll break your skin. You got to wear certain protective material and stuff. But at the end of the day, I mean, our mission was to train what they called, their role. They're playing the role of guerrillas, and so what the Army uses for that is people that know they draw them from the military because they own them. They're in the Army, but they're what we call soft-skilled MOSs, not combat arms. They're not trained in infantry tactics except for the very basic stuff.
Yeah.
But they play the role that they don't know anything, and so they're simulating like a freedom fighter in some far-off land that's got the heart and desire to fight, but doesn't have the luxury of being to basic training and ranger school and all that great stuff. And so your job as the student detachment is to go in and train these guys to be effective fighters, and then you go on missions against these basically elite infantry in the U.S. Army and take them on.
That's awesome, dude.
It's a lot of fun.
So you eventually reached Master Sergeant. That's like what, 3 stripes up, 3 down?
Yep.
What's after that? First sergeant?
No, well,
Sergeant Major, right?
So actually, so there's a couple ranks in the Army that had the pay grade is the same, but the rank is different.
Okay.
And so Master Sergeant is one of those ranks. So E8 is the pay grade.
Mm-hmm.
So you're 8 steps up the scale in the pay grade.
Right.
And Master Sergeant and First Sergeant are actually the same pay grade.
Oh.
But there's a different responsibility for them.
Command responsibilities, right?
Yeah, so typically...
That's when you get like the oak leaf and the cluster and all that.
Yeah, so 3 up and 3 down is the Master Sergeant. A First Sergeant will have a diamond in the middle between those rockers and the stripe. And a So a master sergeant in the regular Army will typically be in a staff position or an
like
admin
a quartermaster
position.
or something, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, so even an infantry master sergeant is probably someone who works in like the operations section at the battalion or something like that.
Okay.
In special forces, a master sergeant is the detachment non-commissioned officer in charge of a team. And so that's what I did when I made Master Sergeant.
So you eventually did see intense combat, right? Now, where did you go for that?
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
In what year? The early days?
No. So the timeline on the War on Terror, I unfortunately sat out of most of it. Depending on how you look at it. I'm not in a wheelchair, and I'm still here to talk to you. So, I mean, there's, and frankly, I have a lot of friends that aren't here anymore.
Right.
You know, but when it kicked off, 2001, I was actually in Bosnia. I was in Sarajevo, part of a special operations joint task force doing another type of mission. And
that you can't talk about.
I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it, or I'll have to go get drunk. But
I'll record it secretly.
Actually, and it's interesting because I'll weave in and out of things that I'm gonna skirt and bypass, and then come back in. And it's not to slight anybody, and it's not to try to look cool. But I mean, I have experienced things that are.
That's why you're here. Oh, yeah, one of the reasons you're here. Yeah.
Yeah, there are things that you know, it's in nobody's interest to talk about, and it's not like an Edward Snowden thing. It's like, hey, this, you know, if I say this, it's gonna affect people's ability to do what they got to do, and it puts people's safety at risk. And
plus, the people you're telling it to there's no chance of them actually understanding the situation, the scenario.
There's certain things like that too.
Yeah.
And frankly, what it really is, and things, and I can say specifically when I was working in the Balkans, when I first went into Special Forces, I was working in 10th Special Forces Group, and we did a lot of stuff. I mean, we were in Kosovo, we were in Bosnia a lot, and doing those things. And largely, 90% of the things we were doing are things that I could tell you about all day long, and 10% are things that aren't really supposed to be talked about. And it's not because anything devious happened or anything that would be an embarrassment to the country or anything like that. Frankly, what it was that those 10% of the time we were working with other organizations that their mission is impossible if people understand what they do.
Yeah.
You know, why they do it's obvious, but what they actually do and why we were in contact with those guys. And there's little weird things like that. And it's not high speed James Bond stuff like that. It's just, hey, this, you know, be professional.
Right.
I mean, every organization has something they don't talk about in public. And
so you got to Afghanistan, and just what can you say about that?
My mission in Afghanistan, as far as special operations goes, is pretty vanilla. I mean, what my team did, we worked with an Afghani National Army reconnaissance company that worked directly for a Afghan National Army brigade commander. So we're talking about different units: mechanized infantry, light infantry, and this Afghan National Army Infantry Brigade was a light infantry unit. And what the reconnaissance unit was for was to gather information for that brigade commander so he can make decisions on how he wants to employ his troops on future operations, or how he needs to shift his operations that are being currently conducted.
And that's super important in Afghanistan, right? Because you have a crazy terrain. It's a country like no other. It's not even really a country in a lot of ways. It's just it's mountains, it's warlords, chieftains. Yeah, nobody knows what the hell's going on or where the enemy is, right?
Yeah, well, we call it Afghanistan, and, you know, depending what tribe you're talking to, they recognize their territory and what they do, and it's hard for any person in Western society with our concept of what a state is to identify.
Nick talked about that too.
Yeah,
about how he equated it to the Western tribes of the Native Americans, where they didn't recognize these weird boundaries.
Well, we call them all. They're all Indians.
Yeah,
but they don't know it.
Yeah, they nobody told them. So they're like, wait, this is news to us. We're not, like, we don't even like those guys.
I thought I was Apache.
Yeah,
I didn't know I was an Indian.
Exactly. And he equated it to that a lot. So I get what you're saying there. So. Sure. Sorry to interrupt you, but go ahead.
No, that's a good way of sizing it up. And so with this company, one of our missions was to mentor them and develop them into a professional capable reconnaissance company that really doesn't need mentorship at some point in time.
Right, that does it on their own autonomously,
yeah.
so we can get our troops out and they can handle their business and
exactly. And so, aside from the combat operations we did, which I would say on average we do 2 to 3 different missions a week of various things. And being a combat reconnaissance company, most of it was gathering information. We weren't the guys flying in on black helicopters, kicking down doors in the middle of the night, taking down high value targets. That wasn't our primary mission.
So you're not like the tip of the spear. You're more like the binoculars and the ears.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Who was the tip? Who was those? Who were those? Navy SEAL? I don't know what I'm talking about.
We need to.
Here comes the rivalry, right? You saw that shit right away. It's like, nah, not those fucking guys.
We need to dedicate an entire show to talking about Navy SEALs. We'll get to that one of these days.
Cultural mythology behind them.
And so what I'll try to describe a little bit about the SOF community. When I say SOF, I'm talking about Special Operations Forces. So there's a big mythology about the whole thing, and I've heard people, well, Delta Force is the best, and no, the pararescue is the best. The best at what? Pararescue is definitely the best at pararescue.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Different.
That's not the same thing I did.
Right.
Right. So, but at the end of the day, we have, within the Special Operations community, you have Joint Special Operations Command, and it's joint, which means it's all branches of service, and what they deal with is counterterrorism.
Right.
And so the units that engage in counterterrorism there's Army Special Forces units that are specially designed to do that. There's Navy SEAL units that are specially designed to do it, which isn't all of them. There's Army Ranger units that are tasked to do that mission, although the Rangers have a far broader mission than most people realize. And all of those have Air Force support at some level, because we have technical experts from the Air Force that help with not just close air support, air strikes, bombing, all the sexy stuff, but just directing aircraft. That can get really complex. Having attack aircraft that provide, lethal support of bombing and strafing to the medevac helicopters that will come in, to the lift helicopters that pick you up and drop you off and pick you up. It gets really complex managing airspace. So that's a lot of times why you have Air Force personnel on scene, is they're the experts at that stuff.
So, and did you find yourself in like hairy, scary?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what, it's I've told people, what'd you do in the Army? Well, Special Forces. Did you go overseas? Oh yeah. And like, oh, you must have really seen some stuff. But I'll tell you, there's some 19-year-old kids that are truck drivers that saw more intense stuff than me, just by proxy of where they were at.
Right, yeah.
But I would say combat in Afghanistan can be very seasonal, depending on what your job is. We'd call it jihad season. So wintertime, it kind of chills out. I mean, it's just too doggone cold. And if your primary means of transportation is some rubber shoes and a motorcycle, you're not going to be as motivated to fight as when it's 100 degrees outside.
Yeah, I'm going to take the winter off from jihad.
Yeah, and
just chill, watch TV.
Yeah,
literally chill.
Yeah. But
wow, man.
Once so springtime kind of comes around, and so you've got the poppy harvest, which you just notice there's an absence of military-age males for about a couple weeks, because they're
smoking opium.
Well, they're working.
Oh, they're working.
Yeah, they're working. They're
selling
harvesting. Yeah, so they're putting together the harvest.
It's one of the biggest sources of opium and therefore heroin in the world.
And then after that harvest season, there's an influx of cash for the local area commanders that do the fighting for the Taliban at the ground level, and so now they can pay people, or they can acquire weapons and food and equipment and all that kind of stuff. And
right, because a lot of these guys that were fighting, right, they're like 17-year-old dudes, and they're some warlord Islamist guy is like, here's $100. Do this thing, and the guy's like, hell yeah. I've never gotten $100 before. I'll go do that thing.
Yeah, go kill Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they probably give them a little more to kill Americans, but
there's a different motivation for a lot of the people doing what they do. Some of them are hardcore. I mean, some of them really are into it.
Yeah.
And I mean, you go to an area where there's a more isolated, and it's been very autonomous and not had any kind of outside influence, and they are very strict fundamentalist Muslim, and there's madrasas, and they get basically indoctrinated into it.
Yeah.
And those guys are motivated because it's the local job. It's what the industry is. Jihad is your career.
And that's one thing where I might have been wrong about some of my positions in the past, is that I've been striking out against some of these liberals like Bill Maher and Sam Harris who really hate Muslims. And there's been a schism in liberalism where some people have really come out and said, no, Islam it's a bigger problem. It's a more violent religion than the others. And here's the evidence. Look at the Middle East. And my response was, well, actually, this is a socioeconomic problem because they live in a poor region of the world, and therefore extremism and violence are far more likely. But then I had to think about Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is quite wealthy, and the people that live there do fairly well. And they're the ones exporting this Wahhabist literal interpretation of the Quran into the rest of the Middle East. And 11 of those 9/11 guys were Saudis, but trained in Afghanistan, you told me.
Right.
But so that's kind of a chink in the armor of my theory there, that it's totally a socioeconomic problem, because there's a lot of like Osama bin Laden didn't grow up poor.
No.
He was a rich man.
Not even close. Yeah.
So
he doesn't know how to spell poor.
He's the
but Saddam Hussein wasn't, except for Kuwait and maybe his fights with Iran, he wasn't really trying to take over other countries and not even saying that Afghanistan is there. I mean, basically, it appears to me to be the same as here. It's poor people fighting rich man's wars, and Saudi Arabia has the money. So they pay other people to fight the war for them.
So you're saying that
they're the ones? Yes, they're exporting. They're the ideologues.
The ideologues are the rich guys.
Yes,
but the ones fighting are the
poor.
The
ones fighting are generally the poor, no matter what country you're in.
I like that sound of that.
So what I think you guys just demonstrated for me is it's complex.
Yeah.
So there's not we can't cut the head off the snake, as some people like to say, or we can't give the one shot in the arm to fix the problem.
Because that's what you do with Hussein, and you created a vacuum with now everyone trying to take that role over.
Yeah.
And you got a bunch of different forces all.
And my point was that to Sam Harris and Bill Maher is that if the Middle East were a Christian region and say we were some other religion, the same thing. I mean, you can't control for all the things that would be different if that were the case. But if the socioeconomic and everything else was the same, but they were Christians somehow,
right.
they would be the same thing going on.
What I would say, this is what I've experienced with Islam, is that it has a grip on people. Its role in society is something that we don't recognize because we don't have anything to replace that. And we've discussed this before, is that you could compare it to Christianity probably in the Middle Ages Europe,
right?
When the church was the dominant institution, and it was used, also
known as the Dark Ages.
The Dark Ages, yeah.
I don't think that's a coincidence.
Absolutely not. And the thing, as a Christian, in my viewpoint, what happened was you have a faith that has been hijacked by the powerful as a tool of manipulation. I don't see much of a difference in that in Islam. What I recognize with Islam is another contrast between Islam and Christianity is European Christianity went through a period of Reformation, and it went through culturally, Europe went through a Renaissance, which ideas were introduced.
Right.
Oddly enough, those ideas came from classical antiquity, which was preserved by Muslims.
Yeah.
It's such a fucking weird thing, isn't it? It's so weird.
This is really important. All you guys listening out there,
It's such a weird fact.
Yeah, this is really important, and that grip of the church on society is what, and people basically became fed up with it, and they saw the corruption,
Right.
and so they said no, and then you have the Protestant Reformation, and then this gives birth to the Enlightenment, and that gives birth to science,
Right.
and all these things. So that was the birth of classical liberalism, was people saying, I don't want to be controlled by these congealed powers like the church or a king or the aristocracy. And so classical liberalism was, and we were talking about this before the show, this is another thing I've kind of been wrong about in talking about the history of liberalism and political thought in the West, is that classical liberalism was basically what you would call libertarianism today, except a more emphasis on equality of different classes of people. But it wasn't, it was very small government. No one control me. It was individualistic. That was classical liberalism. The 1600s, John Locke, and the 1700s.
Right.
So, anyway, so that was a really good point you made. That you were saying that Islam is going through perhaps a similar historical change as Christianity was going through when in the. Around
if you look,
1400s?
I guess if you look at the 13th century, the 1200s, when we're on crusade, version 4 point whatever.
And the plague put an end to that.
Yeah. And the thing is, what you had, backing up even a step further from that, when you're looking at the seasons of Arab conquest, look at what they're taking over. They're taking places that were Greek. So at the end, you get this transition where the Romans are checking out, but the Romans preserved and were able to do what they did because they had adapted a lot of the Greek science and mathematics and philosophy. Yep. And in the long run, the Muslims that conquered those areas recognized it's like, we came from the desert. These people know how to build stuff. Maybe it's a good idea to have some of the,
architecture, books.
Yeah, that's kind of neat.
Yeah,
and so it was new to them, and even the Ottoman Empire isn't something I would describe as and I've jumped forward into history a little bit, but I mean, it's not something I would describe as a open society or a liberal society, but there
were surprising aspects of toleration.
Yeah, to a large degree, and it's
like you could be Jewish or Christian and not be slaughtered if you lived in some of those cities.
You had to subjugate yourself for sure.
You had to do things that Muslims didn't, like pay extra taxes and crap like that.
Right. But I mean, at the end of the day, they really preserved what facilitated our enlightenment in Europe, and ultimately those concepts are what fed directly into when you say Locke, I mean, to me that goes directly into Jefferson,
for sure.
I mean, he
was an anti-federalist, Jefferson, so he didn't want a strong federal government because he thought it would get too powerful and it would oppress the people.
Yeah.
And then he became president, and he had to tone some of that shit down because he's the president, so he's the representative of the federal government.
That's what happens to all of them.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders too. Yeah. No, he's open about being a collectivist, big government socialist. He doesn't know. There's no ideological problem there. But like Rand Paul, if he became the president,
like what do you do now, big guy?
All his libertarian friends would be like, "Well, you're gonna chop half of the government off." He's like, "Well, let's just
let's hold off on that. Let's think about that for a second.
To work with my Democratic friends in Congress."
Yeah, it's interesting to note too. So I'm definitely pretty conservative on a lot of issues, and there's a lot of libertarian concepts that I find really appealing. But at the end of the day, I mean, I've worked for the federal government my entire adult life,
right?
And I mean, I'm not an anti-government person at all.
Yeah,
I'm a responsible government, and so I don't know how we got to this argument over we need to shrink the government I think we just need to be efficient with our government.
Yeah,
you know?
I wish that Bernie Sanders would reach out a little bit and say something about how he plans to curb government waste. You know, why doesn't he say something? Because a lot of people, I think, like his ideas, but say, come on, Bernie, you're going to expand the size of the government. You're just going to waste more money. It's not going to work. Like, why doesn't he say, here's my 5-step plan to reducing government waste?
Because maybe he doesn't have one.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, probably not.
I hear all these cool catchphrases like reduce government waste, common sense gun laws. What does it fucking mean? What do they all mean? Because you hear that thing over and over again, but nobody ever takes it to the next step and says, here's what I mean by cutting government waste. Here's what I mean by a common sense gun law. It's just a fucking thing you say to get somebody's attention.
Yeah, but
you never
I
explain
think
it.
if you were serious about like cutting waste, you could look up the studies, look up the economic scientific studies of how to make more efficient a bureaucratic system.
What I'm saying is, I think like what Beef just said, maybe he doesn't have a plan. Maybe that's just a nice little phrase to throw out there to get some votes.
Yeah,
it's just vote gathering. It's not. There's no intention.
Yeah, I
also,
do get annoyed by his.
If you're going to get rid of government waste, you're going to ruffle feathers somewhere.
Oh yeah,
you're going to.
Yeah.
With change, you're going to do something that someone else doesn't like. Whether it's okay, well, we're going to stop. Like closing down
jobs.
DM. Like even people that are for decreasing military spending.
They're
don't want that are here. Politicians do something. They don't want DM closed.
Davis Monthan Air Force Base.
Davis Monthan, yeah. So
they're like, cut it somewhere else.
Do it somewhere else.
Because that'll hurt jobs here.
Right.
One thing that I don't really hear from anybody in government, I don't hear it from any candidate, and I don't hear it from the electorate, is define, why don't we define what government does?
Right.
Why don't we define what it's supposed
role.
to be? And
the first step of that is the government is my servant. It's a servant of my interests.
Right.
It is not an independent body that dictates things to me. Now, laws, of course, do that, and some people aren't going to like laws, but we do have to get back to the idea of this representative body, not these career politicians.
Aren't laws supposed to be things that we agree on as a majority?
For the most, yeah.
Right.
So I don't know if we're advocating more direct democracy like they have in California, because that can be a mess.
So here's what's interesting to me is, so we were talking about Jefferson, and so it's funny to listen to people talk about the founding fathers like this was this cabal of guys that were just all on the same sheet of music, and they don't realize for the post-revolutionary period how close we came to not being the United States.
Yeah. The Articles of Confederation were before we had a constitution, and they were this loosey-goosey connection of the states, and they were useless. The government couldn't tax.
No.
They couldn't raise an army. The government couldn't really do anything. It could negotiate with foreign powers. That was it.
Well, I would say this: if we didn't have Washington and Adams as the first two, if we had someone more like Jefferson off the bat, there wouldn't be a U.S. We wouldn't be sitting here talking as Americans. I mean, we might be here doing something, but
and people don't recognize the role of Hamilton either. He was a huge Federalist. Him and Madison wrote that damn Constitution.
Yeah,
and Jefferson and everyone were against all that shit from the get-go.
And probably more important in the long run, as far not more important for how we've developed and what we've become, but important in getting the Constitution ratified was the Federalist Papers, along with John Jay,
written by Hamilton and Madison and Jay.
And basically, what they did was they explained
to the people
to the people
and published it in the newspaper.
They weren't. So that's the bottom line: is you're not trying to lobby to politicians to convince them, because they're already in a faction. They're already. It's kind of like our current elections. If someone's a registered Democrat or a registered Republican, you're not going to agree with anything the other guy. Was a good debate, Obama. I'm going to vote for you.
Yeah.
No, I'm already. Well, maybe even if I like him, I can't because I'm Republican or whatever. But selling it to the people so that.
But when you read those papers, right, and you think about something of that verbosity and that well written being published today, and nobody could read it. Nobody that we know, the people, our parents couldn't read it. They'd be like, I don't know what this says. Well, the language was so beautiful, and their literary skills were so.
Even I would argue, even then, you had a significant portion of our population that was illiterate.
Oh, sure.
But
We had great literacy rates even then, though. Really high for the whole world, for
well,
Europe, too.
another thing that would happen though is the discourse about significant events was a community activity. So
right.
if you're going to read
Town
Federalist,
hall.
if you're going to read Federalist number 23 in, Bodunk,
Some dude will
Pennsylvania,
read it and then explain
Yeah,
it to you at the
yeah.
town meeting. Yeah.
and these guys will discuss it why we think this is a good idea, and so then they say, "Hey, we're gonna tell our delegate this is what's important to us. This is what we liked out of that kind of thing," because you didn't have to go home and microwave the meal for your 6-year-old and tune into whatever the
And
cool
you
TV show
you
is
didn't
today.
have the 8-hour work day either. Life was different. It was a lot
Yeah,
different.
yeah.
There might have been even more leisure time in a sense. The work was harder, but then you could just kind of go.
It was seasonal.
Yeah.
It was dictated by the day.
Yeah.
The course of hours in the day. I mean,
Yeah.
you didn't flip on electric lights at night. I mean,
Right.
but at the end of the day, you probably spend a lot more time thinking and reflecting and talking to other people, and so I think even complex language could be digested over a longer period of time. Where now, I mean, try holding someone's attention for 30 seconds. It's not a joke. It's not
I'm
just
trying to go back to that, man. I'm unplugging slowly.
Yeah,
Me too.
You have to read. That's the way
Yeah.
to get it back.
And I've been like, I barely watch any TV at all anymore. That was my first step, is getting rid of TV. Like, if I watch it, it's like the fucking Diamondbacks or a movie.
Yeah.
I barely watch any shows.
I watch way too much TV. I'm into all these awesome. It's the golden age of television, right? That's the crappy thing. Is that
It
it's
is.
the best television ever.
When you
is
know,
now
you tell
by
me about
far.
all this stuff, and I'm like, I can't,
Mark,
man.
don't
I
even
just can't.
scoff.
He's ready. I can see the face.
The production value, the acting, the stories, the serialized dramas. Come on, man. There's no. You want to go back to Mama's Family and the Golden Girls?
Brady Bunch.
Oh.
Brady Bunch, Scooby-Doo.
I keep hearing you talk about the movie Babe and Babe 2, Pig in the City.
Yeah.
Online. You love those movies.
Yeah. Well, Babe 2 and Babe's good, but Babe 2 is the one.
Babe 2 is the one, man.
And it's,
So would you give
both
that an
of
A+?
those? Oh yeah, that's an A+. Both of
Not
those.
Mad Max, but
both of
Babe
those
2.
are. Well, no, but Mad Max. Guess who was the director of both those?
The guy who did Babe 2?
Yep.
Oh, my God.
Mad Max, Road Warrior, Fury Road.
Holy-
George
Directed
Miller.
Babe 2?
George Miller directed Babe 2. I think he wrote all of them.
I stand corrected, sir.
Yep.
I haven't seen Babe or
You should
Babe
see
2,
Babe
Pig
2.
in the City.
But they're both.
You have to say it with the extended title.
Babe,
Pig in
Babe 2,
the
Pig in the City.
Yeah,
Actually,
thank
it's just Babe, Pig in the City. But it's the second one.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
yeah, no, it's good, and
I'll
it's
bet.
it's a
It
kids
probably is.
movie, but it's pretty dark.
Oh, no, I like that.
An old folks' home burns down, and
Like The Secret of Nim, or what's it called? Nim?
Secret of Nim.
yeah,
Yeah,
Secret of Nim,
that's
Plague
dark.
Dogs.
Have you
Dark
seen
stuff.
Nine?
Watership Down.
With Tamir Bekmambetov?
I-
Pretty dark cartoon.
know, I
also.
have seen
Have you seen
that.
it?
Yeah,
Have you seen it, Brian? You, Beef?
No.
It's called Nine.
yeah. That with those 9 different guys
Yeah.
with the numbers on them.
Yeah,
that
very
was
dark
awesome.
cartoon.
That was awesome.
Great
Oh,
animation.
it's cartoon. No, I don't think I've seen it.
Is it something you can see?
Yeah, I have it on DVD. It's Tamir Bekmambetov. He's the same guy who did Wanted. He did Night Shift and Day Shift, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, he's,
Um,
some other things too. I don't remember.
I guess this stuff doesn't really fit in, but let's just jump to. Oh, it kind of does. So, this is another area that I wanted to address that I haven't been quite right about, but there's a really he's an anarchist, a guy on YouTube who makes a lot of videos. He's really popular. Stefan Molyneux. He's this Canadian guy, extremely intelligent, but he's an anarchist, and an anarcho-capitalist. He loves capitalism, but he hates government.
Right.
And the guy is way smarter than me, but I have the ability to watch his videos and then figure out why I think he's wrong.
Right.
First of all, anarchism is just theoretical, man. It's never
Sure.
really happened before, and where it has, it didn't last long. But
That's how we wound up. That's why tribes formed.
Right.
But isn't that every political theory?
that they don't work out
That
according to plan.
everything works. Everything is good on paper. Everything looks beautiful on paper. When you put it into the real world, that's when shit goes wrong.
Yes. basically. But he pointed out that he was talking about this whole white privilege thing, and he's actually very socially conservative, although he's an atheist, and he thinks you should never hit your children ever, and that's a reason for violence and everything. So he has a lot of liberal views, but he doesn't believe in like white privilege and stuff. And so one thing he was saying is that like the rate of black illegitimate children has been skyrocketing.
Right.
And after World War II, it was like 20-something%. And black families were steadily moving up and catching up to whites. And then you had the Civil Rights Act and other government intrusions is the way he interprets this. And he says ever since then, this liberal approach to race, illegitimate rates of illegitimacy in the black community have gone up and up and up. And by the 70s, it was like 56%. And then now it's like 70% or something. Just a real mess, just a total mess. And people are trying to figure out why this is. And, this guy, he's not racist, so he says it's the fault of liberals. It's a fault of white liberals because you've been these government handouts and stuff encourage blah 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 and not taking responsibility.
They foster dependency.
Thank you. And but he did. I have no idea if any of that is correct.
Well, it's not your idea; it's his. So
right. But what a great point that he made was that one thing that is new under the sun is the abolition of slavery. This has never, ever happened before. So there was slavery in almost every community throughout all of recorded history until 1806 or 1809. Britain becomes the first power to ban slavery. First they banned it in the UK, and then they banned it in their colonies. And it was extremely profitable at that time. So it's a fallacy that they did it because it wasn't profitable anymore. They did it for moral reasons, because an anti-slavery community grew up, a liberal community, and pushed for that, and they banned slavery. And then, they sure as hell weren't going to let other countries profit from it. France banned it. Then we banned it, and then finally in 1870-something, Brazil became the last major nation to ban slavery. And then during the mid-1800s Britain went and enforced the ban of slavery in the Muslim empire that still existed. And so then slavery more or less disappeared, vanished from the face of the earth. And that is a very new thing. And this guy was saying, look, I mean, I don't know if you can even say this today in our PC culture, but he was saying, look, that was an achievement of white men. And of course, there were women involved in this writing and the moral campaign. Of course, there were black people like Frederick Douglass, like amazing standout characters with just insanely genius people that were born slaves like Frederick Douglass and ended up writing these amazing treatises. But it was white people that did this, that achieved this. And so even though there are still a lot of inequality and inequities in our culture, we should, and I think it's important for liberals to look back and be proud of what we have done already, and for liberals to look back and be proud of what America is, because that's one of their biggest flaws today is this. That's why the right can get away with calling liberals unpatriotic, because we are always shitting on America.
Right.
And so I boiled it into this statement that liberals are disgusted by the American past, whereas conservatives are disgusted by the present and what they think is going to happen in the future.
Right. No, that's awesome.
What if it all bothers you?
Then you're a misanthrope.
That's okay. So that's me. Thank you. I cleared a lot of things
that's
up today.
That's what you and Mark are on that side of the table.
This has been extremely cathartic for me. So John's admitting that he segregated us on purpose, Mark. Mr. Liberal over here. Fucking fencing us in on our side of the table. He made it clear this is our side of the table.
But like the abolition of slavery,
you're not impressed.
Do we really think we accomplished a lot doing that?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I
actually
so we think we actually got rid of slavery.
Yeah,
by abolishing slavery
to a large degree.
Yeah. Chattel slavery,
I'm just saying,
where men were chained into ships and died in the hull of a ship being transported.
Well, sure, they're not being transported across oceans anymore. Now they're just being transported across state line, maybe, or just on bus from.
So what are you referring
one
to
prison to another? I'm talking about prison population.
Oh, that's a very good point.
And pretty much, we've got the most prisoners of
world.
any country
Yeah,
in the world.
By far, yeah.
Of any industrialized
By a
nation.
long
No,
shot.
any nation.
Any nation?
Yeah, we lead the world, bro.
25% of the
and-
Top
world's
of the heap,
prisoners
man.
are here.
I'm not going to
King
say a
of the hill.
majority, but a good percentage of the people that are in prison are black
I
or
think it is a
people of
majority.
color.
Yeah.
And majority of why they're in that prison is like drug charges,
Right.
where crack cocaine buys you a bigger sentence than powder cocaine.
100 times worse, actually.
Right. So,
on
I mean,
average.
are we really going to say, like, oh, there's no more, we got rid of this unjust system
No,
that,
you're-
like,
you're
threw
right.
people into chains and made them do this work? Yeah, we pay them 35 cents an hour now, you know? So,
No,
I it's not exactly the same.
No. I'm glad you brought that up, and it is legitimate. But my point was that liberals, while we complain about that stuff, which we should, and we need to change it. I can't emphasize enough how much I agree with you. You have to look back and say the abolition of slavery in 1865 was a very big step, and the British abolition of 1809 before that, because not every Western country is like us in that. So they have actually gotten rid of slavery.
No, I'll say it was a step, but unfortunately, like a lot of stuff, I think it's more how it looks and how it is. And it's just like the N-word. Everyone, wants, oh, you can't say that. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, if you could eradicate it from the English vocabulary, get rid of it,
The sentiment
guess what?
would still exist.
Sentiment still exists.
Yeah.
Another word would take over for it.
Right.
Could start calling people school desks or,
Yeah.
whatever.
Mr. Varble, you're itching to.
Oh yeah, I am. So to bring us into my post Army career, one, I'm a current full-time college student.
Nice.
I'm also a federal law enforcement officer.
Oh, right. You
So
work
I'm
in
I'm a park ranger with the National Park Service. I've got a different perspective on certain things since I've been.
Do you want to comment on
police
the
officer.
prison industrial
Absolutely,
complex?
absolutely.
Okay.
So what I would say, what I recognize by stats and numbers, we got a problem.
Right.
We definitely do. I don't know. I
Can you
don't
say
know
what the problem is?
What? Well, here's my theory on it. Growing up where I grew up, it was, I tell people, ask me, where'd you grow up? Illinois. And they're looking at me and like, oh, white bread boy raised in the cornfield or
Right.
something like that. And
Yeah.
what I did, I lived in an industrial area that was sort of like a sub Chicago.
Okay.
We weren't a suburb, but we lived across. A state, and it was on the Mississippi River, and it was at the time when I was a kid, it was the farm implement capital of the world. So we had J.I. Case, International Harvester, John
Yeah.
Deere. John Deere is actually
Oh,
from Moline,
wow.
Illinois, which
That's
is right there.
huge.
Yep.
Just Peoria, Pekin?
Peoria is nearby. It's about
Okay.
70 miles. Pekin's about 60 miles away or
No,
something. like
my
that.
dad's family's from Pekin, Peoria. So.
Okay, yeah. Well, grew up in the same neighborhood generally. But we had, we were a melting pot. It wasn't, it wasn't like a theory I had to think about. All I had to do was look around my classroom when I was a kid, and you couldn't if you asked me what was the national race of the United States. And it's interesting, we talk about these problems from a liberal perspective, and a lot of times people say, America's the most racist country, America's the most this country or that country. And they're thinking it from the terms of we're a white Christian country, and that wasn't how I grew up. I didn't grow up in a homogenous.
And I'll jump in briefly. When they say that we're really racist like that, like I lived in Scotland for a little over a year, and it's true in the sense that they don't go around using racial slurs and stuff, but it's because there's no black people there.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they don't have the opportunity to hate black people. But when they do talk about them, it's very stereotypical. It's not necessarily negative, but it's very stereotypical and like cartoonish to ways that even an American, a moderate American would kind of look at them askew and be like, don't talk about them like they're like animals or they're weird, another species, because that's how
Right.
Europeans tend to
Right.
so like in a sense they're not racist, but it's only because they don't have the history of having to lift those races up
Right.
So it's not really true that we're more racist. There's just more there's more out front racial conflict and
yeah.
discourse here.
This is one thing that I recognized where I was growing up. First of all, we were so closely intermingled that, aside from recognizing physical differences that hey, your skin doesn't look like mine, okay, or come from a different neighborhood than I come from or something like that. But when it's time to go to the playground, we weren't like, oh, I'm not going to hang out with those people over there. I mean, we didn't get more conscious of it until we got older, when we're supposed to feel a certain way about each other.
And then the TV
stuff.
and your parents and stuff start.
All those outside influences. And I think when I became a teenager, I did start recognizing, hey, man, some of my friends live in some really crappy areas.
Yeah.
And I've never met Robert's dad.
Right.
Where's his dad? And you never talked about it. His dad was in prison.
Right.
And about 14, 15, there's certain neighborhoods you don't go to visit your friends at certain times because you're just not the right.
It's not safe. Yeah.
And so we've got this perception like, oh, the white man keeping me down thing. And it's like, I can't go visit my friends in their neighborhood, but they can come up and see me in mine because it's safe for them here. There's not a bunch of rednecks running around in pickup trucks gunning down and lynching my black buddies hanging around in my neighborhood.
Oh, right.
But I'm not going to go down to his neighborhood because some 18, 19-year-old kids are going to kick my butt.
But he doesn't want to live in his neighborhood either because it's not safe for him either.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. I mean, you're not. I mean, these things, kind of.
Brian, are you trying to say that it's bigger than a black and white issue?
Well, yeah, I'm working up to that. And so here's my thing that I would notice that people that were close-knit, same level of intelligence, same kind of almost outlook on the world, and then we get to the point, well, it's time to make decisions. I'm going to have to move on my own here. What am I going to do with my life? I'm going to go to Brian Varble, I'm going to go to community college and get a degree and go in the Army and raise a family. And so playing football in high school, offensive tackle, defensive end, and a buddy of mine, Tony, played on the other side. I was the right side tackle, he was the left side tackle. On the defensive side of the line, I was the left end and he was the right tackle. Don't ask me how it all lined up like that, and it worked out. But Tony is a guy who I played football with for 4 years that was my buddy. I mean, we're there together, every day after school during football season, hanging out. And someone that if I ran into in the hallway, we'd sit there and chew the fat and talk and everything like that. But I'm no more or less privileged than Tony because he really wasn't poor. I certainly wasn't any more intelligent or capable of him than anything. By the time we were 20, he was in prison.
Was he black?
He was black.
Okay.
And Tony's in prison for selling crack, and I'm in community college.
So are you boiling it? You're emphasizing the role of personal responsibility and choices.
Definitely personal responsibility and choices. But what is familiar to him? What does he perceive as this is an outlet? This is how I do it. Oh,
right.
This is what I do to get money. This is my job. This is what is available to me. This is what I'm capable of. And so there's a bunch of complex factors that go into that. And
so the war on drugs, socioeconomics, environment, role modeling,
and
personal choices, responsibility.
At the end of the day,
life's hard.
What is it in his community where people say this is what we do? And what is it in my community where people say this is what we do? All those things factor in for sure. And the thing that I believe is that if you blame it on me because I'm white, it's not doing anything for anybody. If we blame it on slavery, it's not doing anything for anybody.
This is another.
What is it? What is it now? What is it now? And so when I look at things like, I never saw Tony's father at a football game. Why? He was in prison.
But you never would have seen my dad at a football game either because he was fucking TDY or he was serving or he was working or he was doing something.
Right.
So I didn't see a lot of my parents at my games either. So
what I'm getting at,
but
though,
they were there at home.
What I'm getting at is
sometimes
what I'm getting at is with me and Tony. It doesn't have as much to do with Tony's black and I'm white. It has to do with
opportunity.
This is where Tony lived, and this is what's normal in his neighborhood, and this is where I live, and what's normal in his neighborhood.
So you're simultaneously acknowledging the influence of what people are taught by the culture and on what they do, and then you're also saying that mixes with personal responsibility, and you just saying, all right, I've got to do it.
You can't have one without the other.
And I agree with that completely, except for you have systemic racism, which the system as it is set up, which predominantly was done by white men. Is the reason that it's a white thing against whoever else. Now, really, for me, I believe it's more of a social economic thing than a racial thing. It's more of a class thing than a race thing. But, like you're saying, why did Tony end up in jail and you didn't? Another big reason for that, and I'm not going to say you, but there's a lot of white kids that do drugs. They party, they do drugs. Maybe they're not all selling it. Maybe some of them sell just a little bit here and there, but they do not get the same treatment from the courts, from police, from anyone as the black kids do. It's the book is not tossed as hard at the white kids as the black kids.
I think
that could be socioeconomics too, though. Because I've gotten in trouble with guys who I got in way more trouble because they had a way better lawyer than me. I had a PD, and they didn't have a PD.
I'm not. Yeah,
but I think there is statistical evidence behind what Mark is saying that if you take the black kid and the white kid, same age, same gender, same crime, I'm pretty sure you'll find harsher sentencing for the black.
I would bet anything in my wallet now on that.
And now the treatment by the cops thing is a little different because we only see these videos and we don't see. But still, I don't know.
But cops are people, right? You know? So if you do something to upset the cop, he's a person,
right?
Like maybe he's not supposed to act that way. Maybe it's in everyone's best interest that they don't. But not everyone has a real good control of their temper.
And the black kid might be more likely to say something offensive, maybe not to resist, but to say "fuck you" to the cop.
Possibly,
right? So.
There's something kind of tying back into when I was trying to draw this parallel between my buddy and I. But I got in trouble as a kid. I got expelled from 2 high schools. Actually, I mean, I got off to a kind of a rough start, and it was just my punk attitude.
Man, I got kicked out of a country.
Yeah, there you go. But I mean, in one of the instances where I was expelled from a school, I was also charged with a criminal trespassing. I was represented in court by a black lawyer. I've had, in the military, my first squad leader was black. I've had black company commanders, battalion commanders, division commanders, a black commander in chief. I mean, I've had the gambit of it. So, what I'm getting at is there's a deeper problem than race. It's related to it, and it's culture. And the thing here's what I'd say about the. If there's a disparity in justice, it doesn't make those in prison now innocent. You know what I mean?
So you're saying they broke the law. Because for my criticism of the prison industrial complex goes back to another thing that you probably don't agree with. It's just my view on drug laws.
Drugs.
So, like if you
end it.
If you think that those laws are just, then the prison doesn't look quite as bad because most of those guys, 99% of them probably broke the law in the way that they were charged with.
Well, here's a new perspective as the law enforcement officer that I didn't appreciate until I started doing this is you look at someone and say, man, this dude's doing, more time because he was caught with crack. How many times? Just without getting any details about the case, I, in November, arrested a gentleman. This has absolutely nothing to do with this guy's race or anything. It's completely insignificant to this case. It was a DUI, driving while intoxicated. And under state law, this guy committed 3 felonies in my presence. One, he was he was over. His blood alcohol level was over a limit that made it a felony. He was driving on a suspended license for having a DUI, which is also a felony. His kids were in the car, which is child abuse in the state of Arizona.
Winning.
Yeah. And as a federal law enforcement officer, I don't have those charges. Those are state charges. Those aren't federal charges that I can levy against him.
Huh.
And one of the things that happens frequently when you're doing an investigation on somebody is you check their criminal history. This guy had been charged with a dozen DUIs. He'd only been convicted. I say only been convicted, but he'd only been convicted of a handful of them.
Wow.
So the thing is when this guy is in the system, and these are facts that are brought in before, when a prosecuting attorney and a defense attorney jockey for a position, and these things are presented before a judge and jury. I mean, prior criminal acts aren't admissible to a jury to decide, but a judge certainly can weigh, even if it's not supposed to be. It can certainly weigh in a judge's decision to say, dude, you keep doing this.
Yeah.
And again,
if I was a judge, I'd put him away, man.
Now, when we're talking,
you got to learn, dude.
When we're talking things like, crack is, the penalties for crack are more severe than powder cocaine. That makes absolutely no sense. When you if you put it in the context of this is how we import and export this product, and so this is our grand scale marketing, and the people who are making the money, the people who are running the industry doing this, have packaged it in this manner, and there's this not as severe penalty for it being processed in this way. That doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, I think
crack is being made by users on the street level.
But one of the things that
dealers.
It was largely, I know Reagan was in office and the war on drugs and all that kind of crap was happening, but it was largely a lot of local lobbying that led to, we want this off our streets.
Well, it was federal in the way that, and the war on drugs, and basically came out after. Well, but the crack cocaine versus powder
80s,
was a big part of basically. L.A. had a lot to do with it in the fighting on gangs.
Yeah. Yep.
And so they basically said, well, crack cocaine is predominantly in urban environments, sold by black, and gangs are dealing with it.
Right.
Whereas powder cocaine is not. They're not really dealing with that so much.
Yeah.
So we're gonna. To throw these people in jail, get them off the streets, blah blah blah. We're gonna weigh heavily on that.
So the way we with our the short attention span and your 30-second soundbite media decision making in the United States, when you show Joe taxpayer that, man, they're gunning each other down in Crenshaw. Or Watts, and now we're the murder capital of the country.
But
we got to do something about this.
But you disagree that legalization would help this. Do you think that would increase use, or because there's a lot of statistics coming from Portugal saying the opposite?
Well, again, I mean, comparing the United States to Portugal is like comparing Europe to Florida.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I think what I would say about that is there's some common sense thing about pot that I think we could look at.
It's kind of different than the other ones. Yeah.
But I don't think just walking into Walgreens and getting some Coke is a good idea, And I'm not sitting here telling you that I think
you can get harder drugs than that in Walgreens
with a
prescription.
You can
you can actually get pharmaceutical Coke if you have a prescription.
They do have that. Huh?
I mean, the thing I'm getting at is a lot of decisions we make are very passionate, because what happens is the stakeholders present their case like it's an all or nothing thing.
Yeah.
If we don't do this right now, the whole world's going to come down.
Yeah.
If we legalize pot, that means all our kids are going to be addicted to heroin because it's a gateway drug and blah blah blah. At the end of the day, I mean,
just the idea of locking someone in a cage though for something they did to their own consciousness. Now, if they commit a crime on that drug, that's
probably
different.
other laws against that crime.
Well, yeah,
there
there's
are.
already
It's a
laws.
crime.
Yeah,
So-
just like you can't drive while you're drunk.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be able to drive while you're high on weed.
I just think there's
Coke,
a
or anything.
very
You can't
basic.
murder somebody over it. You can't go steal stuff to buy the
Right.
drugs.
Yeah.
what I will definitely say is what we have now needs to be improved. It needs to be changed. I can't say that we would come to the same
Legalize everything.
conclusions
Right.
on things. And the other thing to do, I reject some of the arguments that people make. It's like, pot's good for you.
People say all
It's a
kinds of-
debate. There's a debate.
I goofed around with it when I was a kid, and it didn't do me any good.
Right.
And that's my personal choice. So if it's legal, one, it's not legal for me to use it anyway in the job that I'm doing now.
Right.
But even if it was, it's not for me.
Yeah.
I've been there. I did it. When I
But
was a
again,
kid.
that's your personal choice.
It is.
Because there's mothers who are being told they can't give their kids these tinctures full of CBDs that have dropped their kids' seizures from fucking hundreds a month to under 10, and they're being told that this is bad for your kid. Really? Because it seems like hundreds of seizures a
there's no
month would be
THC
worse.
in it.
Right.
Yeah. It's.
So I think there is proof that it can be good for you. I got a buddy who's off a lot of medications because
But
he started treating his
It's
PTSD with
definitely
marijuana instead.
good for you, but it also is definitely bad in other ways.
I mean, so
Well-
I got I
And you're talking about two completely different things. What you're talking about is this tincture, CBD,
it doesn't
no
even get you
THC at
high.
all.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I mean, but when someone
I'm
says
saying it can be good for you.
See, it can be good for you. Then someone else thinks, oh, so if I smoke a joint every day on my couch, yeah, it's good for me. It's not, So
I
it's a
wouldn't
little
say that it
different.
would be
It's
bad
not-
for you.
But it could be bad for
be
someone.
bad for some
Some
people.
people
For
just
someone, yeah.
even in motivation.
The-
Just maybe
yeah.
they're not going to do anything with
Yeah.
their life.
Everything's
it's-
bad for something. I'm allergic to
right,
most
right,
of those
right.
drugs you mentioned. I can't take any of those oxys.
I'm not saying that we should keep the drugs illegal.
it's a
for
mix.
That reason,
It's a mixed bag.
But I am saying I agree with Brian about
Well,
when people. Well, I agree.
There's a couple of
Too many
Brians
damn
here.
Brians. But
Richter and Varble.
right. But I mean, when he's saying that, it's not people that are all, oh no, pot's good for you. It cures cancer and makes hair grow on your head and does everything. It's this wonder drug
Right.
that
It's an exaggeration.
I do have more respect for people that say, you know what, legalize it because I want to get high. You sit there and drink your whiskey or beer. I want to get high.
I mean, there's no doubt.
You know?
There's no
doubt that
and-
alcohol is more dangerous than marijuana.
Well, I've
No,
never
it-
seen anybody smoke a bong and then go out and get into a fight.
It
Yep.
just doesn't
You know,
happen.
doesn't
and,
happen
and a
much.
million
I mean,
other things too.
but-
or beat their wife or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they do. But
I mean, and-
not because of the joint.
So there's
No, that's probably the off night.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's whiskey night
It's
that
when
she
you
takes
ran
the
out of,
beating. Yeah.
weed.
I guess my point on most of these issues is there's the way it's packaged for us to digest. We're not at the Federalist Papers where we've got to sit down and think about this for a while and come back together and make a decision. It's more like, okay, we've got to decide now. It's all or nothing.
No, yeah.
And
Nothing's
An
all. Or,
intelligent-
there's no
yeah.
one
So-
thing that's
and
all.
furthermore,
or
I mean the
nothing.
way it works in our legislature, it we're going to get you focused on legalization of pot, but guess what? We just opened a new nuclear facility over here because
Right.
we shut that in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it works. I mean, we'll get you emotional about this, but you don't even realize. So you're not even paying attention to the pork that gets slipped in.
If I had the deciding vote on, but I couldn't alter it at all, and it was legalize all drugs tomorrow or keep them all illegal, and
Right.
I had the deciding vote, I cannot say that I would. Which one I would do? I cannot say that I would say
Right.
legalize all drugs.
Because
I-
all drugs really
Dude,
kind of.
I know that deaths would happen because of my
Yeah.
decision.
Right.
But I also
Right.
know that if I keep them illegal, deaths will happen because of my
Because
decision.
I agree with you too. I don't think you should walking into Walgreens and getting cocaine. It's a little different than
and that's
legal
not-
marijuana.
That's not how it would be, though. Anyway.
No.
At first, there's decriminalization.
But I mean, if you're gonna
which-
decriminalize-
which means you can't sell it.
Yeah, because
Right.
come on, you're not just going to walk into the Walgreens. Then you have to go into the bathroom with 3 other people.
Yeah.
right.
Then you can get the cocaine.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're talking about decriminalizing it, then eventually you're talking about then eventually you're talking about availability. Like it will be available in some way without consequence.
Some
Right.
some
Possession
than-
of a small amount, you won't get thrown
The
in
wa-
jail, basically.
Right.
Or you'll get a fine.
But still, possession of a small amount of cocaine, to quote Rick James, which is a hell of a drug.
Yeah.
A small amount of cocaine repeated can really fucking send your life into a tailspin.
Sure, and,
The same with a bottle of liquor.
anything
Yeah.
that has potential for abuse.
well, then you could argue so don't legalize all these drugs, but decriminalize all
I
of
think
them.
though-
what happened in Holland.
but thinking
too. They're
about
just
that, though,
decriminalized.
That seems to actually leave some of the worst parts of it, because then you would still have the cartels, right? Because
Oh,
it
sure.
wouldn't be legal to
Sure.
sell it here, so
Right.
you
Right.
still have a black
Yeah.
market, and that's
No.
one of the
Right.
things we really want to
Yeah.
get rid of.
But you're
That's where the
definitely not
violence
getting rid of
comes
them
from,
keeping
too,
it.
a lot of times.
You're definitely not
Competition.
getting rid of it keeping it illegal.
There's been
Oh, right. of
there's been
course.
there's been reverberations from just legalization in 2 states, Washington and Colorado, and especially Colorado because it's along the corridor that feeds in from Mexico. I mean, Western states. I mean, it goes throughout the country, but it gets mainlined into a lot of places a lot quicker. And in
No,
Colorado,
no, wait a minute,
one of
though,
the things that has happened that has kind of changed their business model for some cartels is a higher volume of heroin that they're bringing in because it's not as profitable for them to push pot in some of those areas.
So they're going to heroin.
Yeah,
and heroin is actually exploding. Heroin use.
They are
in
finding
America.
a whole. Well, and again, what do you do? What's a good marketing model to get people addicted to your product? It doesn't matter if it's heroin or a Big Mac. You know, I mean, get people addicted, make them think they have to have your product. And get them hooked on it, whether or not they need it.
Well, I
I
think
kind
a
of
big.
want a Big Mac now.
Yeah, me too. I had my cheat day yesterday. I went to Gray's and had a free
Well, and
range
then also
burger.
Nice.
want one.
the big
So
part of it is the quality of the merchandise too, because like Colorado and Washington and other places where it's legal and you can go in and get it, they're not selling weed from Mexico.
No.
You know what I mean?
There's no seeds in it.
Yeah, there's no. So a
You're
lot
not
of the
getting
stuff that
Naco
you're
No
getting,
High.
a lot of stuff that the cartels are dealing with is just going straight out to the East Coast now.
Yeah.
Where
So,
it's-
Brian, were you trying to say that that the legalization has increased the flow of marijuana into Colorado? Because I'm pretty sure those are
No,
local
he
growers.
said heroin.
Heroin.
Yeah, I
No,
know you said heroin,
the second order effect that I was talking about was
The
the increase
heroin?
in the marketing of the heroin.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Now,
you know,
now
another-
they are. There is. If you look at this is. You got to dig kind of more into like East Coast organized crime, mafia kind of stuff. How do they undercut legitimate businesses? You know, when you got the bypassing taxes on tobacco and alcohol products and things like that. There are cartels
Markets.
that market into people that are getting cut rate weed and selling it.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, and I don't think it's like on a grand scale, because I think what Mark's saying is right. I think the quality of the marijuana that's being produced in those places is like through the roof.
Extremely
Yeah,
high. And it's from local growers. That are,
And-
that are
and-
making it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
from local
I-
growers.
I-
Those
or
people
Cal-
know each other
Yeah.
a lot.
Well,
Or
and then,
California
and then
or
the other
British
thing,
Columbia.
the other thing about that I was going to say was, so people who smoke weed, you know, they are more like, oh, well, no, this is really good and I like this stuff. And if you're addicted to heroin, I don't know how choosy you're going to be.
I know, yeah.
I don't
it's,
know
it's
how
just how
much-
strong
oh,
it is.
man,
It's
no,
not like
right.
what kind it is.
right.
But you know, I think another reason for the heroin, the demand going up, is that they're cracking down finally on the oxys and
on the
these
prescription drugs.
Like in Florida, you can't go to those pain management centers anymore and just
Yeah.
get free drugs.
Yeah.
Now, they do have other horrible things going on in Florida that are contributing to welfare or Medicare fraud, where they'll sign you in and give you a mental health diagnosis and then get you on Suboxone. And then if you leave and they'll call, they have the lady at the desk will call you if you haven't been there in a while and say, hey, you need to come in and get it reevaluated for your meds. And like the person's finally getting off heroin,
Yeah.
and they call them to come in to get re-addicted. It's really messed up. It was on Joe Rogan the other day. It's really scary.
It happens in so-called legitimate circles of medicine too. You have people that you know.
Doctors, yeah.
Well, there was that cancer doctor in Ohio, Michigan, that was diagnosing people with cancer that did not have cancer.
Yeah.
And then he was getting,
Oh my
putting them
God.
on these treatments and giving them surgery
Expensive,
and all this
yeah.
different stuff, and he was raking in money, and he just got a life in prison sentence.
Real complicated topic, but I think we got into there pretty good.
Yeah,
Dug around.
that's good.
I wanted to ask you something though, Mr. Varble. So what do you think of for-profit prisons?
I mean,
Marco Rubio, a big beneficiary of those.
I wish like we could see how many things are contracted out for profit by the government. I mean, there's so much of it that, you know, there's so many things that
I'm pretty sure prison shouldn't be one of those things.
Well, I mean, how about feeding your troops overseas? I mean, how about
catering private food companies.
it's not even catering. It's just how food is prepared and cooked.
Yeah.
And we used to have cooks when I first came in the Army. How about people that build our facilities over there? I mean, it's just, I don't know where I can only tell you about what I experienced firsthand. And
Okay, so what about legislation like, though, if these prisons aren't full to a certain amount, that the states actually owe them money? There's like a fucking contract. That shit's underhanded, man.
This is
that
why,
ain't like building facilities or feeding troops.
Well, and this is why I asked the
locking
question.
people
There's
in
a,
cages.
but when we get down to what is underhanded in politics, I don't know where to start. Then.
But this is
You know,
taking
I mean-
people's freedom and putting them in jail and
Right.
maybe even affecting sentencing.
No.
And yeah.
there's actually a
'Cause
law.
Here's the bottom line.
And these numbers of people locked up are contributing to this black cultural problem because your dad isn't there.
So let's get down to law. Who's denied due process? Show me that. Who's denied due process? Who's in?
It's a matter of how the due process is
Well, there's-
applied, I think, is what the contention is.
No, I see. What you're saying.
There's a bill up for vote in
you
Arizona.
can't- you
SB 1070.
You can't just throw someone who didn't
You
do
can't.
anything
Yeah, you
in
can't.
jail.
Hey guys, we got a quarter to meet
Right.
this month. We need to go out and make some
Okay,
arrests.
but why is it
But
a
they-
state's responsibility to make sure that a prison is full to a certain capacity or pay a penalty for that?
Because we have bad politics in the United States.
Okay.
So you disagree with that setup
Yeah,
then?
but the thing is I have a hard time making that my issue when so that happens with prisons. It probably happens with the way our highways are built. It probably happens with
But
the
Brian's
way...
Richard's saying it's such a more severe thing. You're taking the freedom of individuals, and because then this
or if you don't,
this quota goes to a police quota.
But
Then,
there's
and
a- but
they
there's
tell
a-
those guys.
but it also
you need
leads
to,
it
like,
also leads to things like lobbying for mandatory sentencing. So you get a guy who's picked up 3 times for having a joint.
Yeah.
For having
Which,
a joint,
in our
which is
view,
against the law.
shouldn't even be
Yeah,
a crime.
but I don't feel like that should be illegal at all.
Right.
But
And
even-
so that guy goes to jail for what, a period of 5 years now to feed
so-
the prison industrial complex because of
Okay,
mandatory
but-
sentencing. So those things all kind of fall in line with each other. Like they each feed the other.
the quota for the state goes to a quota
Because
for
if
cops.
it wasn't big money, then there wouldn't be so much money coming from the industrial prison complex to current candidates if it wasn't such a big deal.
So I know people that have gone to friends, people that I know. Not I know people that have gone to prison for,
I know people have gone to
dealing
prison for all
drugs,
kinds
and
of shit.
it wasn't a joint. It was they were moving.
Right, but there
quantities.
are people
Quantities
in jail
that didn't-
for mandatory sentencing that haven't been caught with much except personal use drugs, and they're in jail with mandatory sentences.
I know people that have been. I know don't know firsthand too much, but I know people that have murdered people that didn't do their full sentence. I mean, it's so I don't know. I
like
mean,
that
it's,
Freddie Gray, he was the young guy that got killed in the back of the van, right? Or
Allegedly.
Yeah.
So, like him, like on Fox News, you'll hear, this is a drug addict and a career criminal. Well, he's got like 15 charges of possession of possession of marijuana.
The woman that was just killed, Sandra Bland,
Yeah.
talking about, they're saying that, well, she smoked marijuana and that caused her depression and that's why she killed herself.
And they did the same thing with Trayvon Martin. Like he got caught for an empty bag of marijuana. It's like we're just rolling our eyes, man. We're like, these people aren't bad people. And I know, but like on Fox News, like when you talk to a lot of white Americans who don't smoke marijuana, to them it does seem reasonable. They're like, well, marijuana's, it's against
makes
the
you
law.
reefer madness.
It's a drug.
Makes you crazy.
Yeah,
Well,
so it's just
I know.
Because can we agree that mandatory sentencing on drug crimes has fed the prison industrial complex? Can we agree on that?
I guess I don't know.
Because I've read a lot of stories about judges who say we don't like it either because it's fucking tied our hands in sentencing.
That's okay. So
we have
so
to
that
throw
is
the
kind of a
book at this guy.
violation of due process.
I'll shoot to that.
It is a violation of due process.
It isn't because it's a law. It's not something they made up.
Okay,
But
technically.
here's the thing. So I'll address mandatory sentencing directly. Is it takes discretion out of the hands of judges,
Right.
and that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
I think that I am an advocate for.
Because not every case is the same, man.
Right. That's why they're judges. That's why judges are given discretion.
Right.
And so that's what I don't like about mandatory
Otherwise, you might as well
sentencing.
just have a computer.
Yeah.
So
And now what I would say though is it's back to what I said before. It doesn't make people in prison innocent. You know what I mean? It doesn't, and that's I don't like.
No,
I don't
it doesn't.
Like
but what I'm saying is that it does promote. If you have a prison that says, if we're not at 80% capacity, then the taxpayers owe us money.
right.
You're cool with that?
I'm not cool with that.
Okay,
But-
that's all I wanted to get to. Like,
but-
I'm not cool with that.
But
either.
I got to tell you this though.
Because don't you think that inspires things
that's
like?
how business is done. That's how.
Yeah, but
that's
I
how
don't think
public money-
incarceration
That's
should
why-
be a business, man.
Richter's saying that this shouldn't be a business transaction. This is a justice.
So-
This is
transaction.
justice. That's not business.
So run
Justice
the
isn't
prisons
business to me.
The states should run the prisons.
But prison is not a determining fact. Prison has nothing to do with sentencing. Prison has nothing to do with prosecution.
No,
Prison
but
has nothing
they're
to do with-
related though. If
it's
doesn't it
it's
inspire? Doesn't the prison industrial complex? Wouldn't those companies that profit from having more people in jail lobby for stricter laws, less rights, mandatory sentencing, all this stuff?
Yeah.
They would lobby for
Sure.
that.
Sure
So
they
they are related.
There
It
was
is related to sentencing
Well,
in
yeah,
that
they
way.
have
That they're
an
going to
effect on
lobby
the
for these
legal
things that
process.
affect the legal process.
There was already that
Because if
judge.
How can
and-
you say?
Because
How can you
if
say
you're-
that lobby didn't affect mandatory sentencing? It did. I'm sure they were in on that.
Mandatory sentencing has been issued before the scale of industrial prisons we have today.
Yeah, but
We'll have to look into it.
Maybe
Right.
that's part of the problem.
We
But
don't
there
have
was
the
a
facts
judge.
in.
There was a
Here,
judge
so-
in New
so-
York that
Right.
just got it was a while ago, but he got sentenced and thrown in jail for basically sending kids to prison.
Yeah.
And he would get paid to do it.
Yeah.
Every single kid
that's
he
the
sent to
kind of
prison,
shit that
he got a
that
kickback.
that's profit leads to.
But that's
It's rare.
Yeah, but that's definitely
That's a rare
standout
case.
But there's also
Still, but
that's the
it
extreme end
shows
of it.
shows
So
the,
that there
the
is a
relationship.
correlation.
The
so
correlation.
so let's go over the history of politics in New York.
No, let's
throughout
not.
the-
Let's not.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Arizona and New York, by the way, considered the two most corrupt states politically in the country.
more so in Illinois.
I'm not sure.
Because
Maybe
I grew
Illinois
up
is
there, and it's a pretty
Arizona
entertaining place.
was ranked number 1 on a recent list, and New York, I just know, is notorious. So,
Well, the last thing I want to say
where,
about
of
the,
course,
the
Miss
prison,
Hillary Clinton was senator.
the prison industrial complex is, I mean, you were saying, Mr. Varble, that you thought that what is happening today needs to change.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree.
And so my whole point is just, I don't think for-profit prisons is the change we need or is going in the right direction.
Yep.
So your thing against that would be that it would be a burden on taxpayers if the state had to run those
Yep.
places.
But it's our burden on taxpayers.
Can't we?
already.
now.
Don't we contract things out on a routine basis from the government to the civilian
We're
sector?
just saying this
My
thing is
contention is that
this thing is
ethically
too
that shouldn't
important.
be one of
and,
them.
and
for
don't we?
Ethically,
And
it
don't
shouldn't be one of
we?
them.
Do we want to? Do we want to give our government the power to provide the effective oversight of it and do it in an effective way, or do we need to?
I think
scrap
so,
the whole
because then
thing?
the people would have more of a say in how it's done. So
Right, right.
things like if the country's against capital punishment, we could maybe get rid of that, or if they're for it, we'll keep it. If the country's against solitary confinement, which to me, like, it should be reserved for very, very rare cases because it's a horrible thing to endure.
Right.
But anyway. Let's move on. We don't have too much time left. But quickly, Mr. Varble, do you have a horse in this primary race?
No,
You don't like anyone?
I don't. It's. I don't know who any of them are.
Oh,
I don't
you're
know
not
what.
following. Okay.
You don't know who Donald Trump is?
It's a. So I think I made a quip yesterday on Facebook. I said this is the first time I've done a Facebook rant since my self-imposed media blackout.
You're just stepping away.
If you're watching anything to do with news, it's like watching one long continuous commercial. It's just, when does it stop?
Yeah.
You're trying to sell me some kind of product and I don't know if I want to buy, and you're talking about the issues that aren't my issues, and I don't even know what your character is. I don't know what you bring to the fight.
So you don't feel represented by any of the Republicans?
No. I don't.
Do you have a big issue that you'd like that would be important to you, that if a candidate brought it up, you would support them?
This is what I seek for, regardless of what party anybody's from, is let's get grounded. Let's make a case for the American people why we have a federal government in the first place. Let's define what its role is, and let's tell them what state governments are supposed to do. Let's say this is what governments are responsible for. These are things where government has crossed the line to a degree because there's been a void of something. There's been a need there, but a void of it, so the government has filled that void. Or things like when we're talking, how did we get to the point where we're having industrial prisons? Well, guess what? We can't have everything. We can't have social programs and the largest military in the world, and obviously we can't have NASA anymore. You know what I mean? So we can't have everything.
Well,
so
not with a monkey in charge of it.
So put a emphasis. I mean, I think it's a shame that people aren't more informed about what their Constitution is.
Yeah.
What rights they've been granted through it, what constraints have been placed on the government through it. And, you hear,
And is the government even operating in our best interest? Because you put, in charge of the science program, didn't they put Ted Cruz in charge of it?
Yeah, it's in charge of the Senate Committee on Science or something like that.
Yeah, so they put a monkey in charge of science, and it just doesn't work. You have to have somebody who actually believes in the process of science to chair the science committee.
I would take it a step further. I think you need to have somebody that understands why the committee exists and what it's trying to facilitate.
Yeah.
The interest of the American
he's
people.
kind of opposed to that whole line of, and they put him in charge of it.
And that was the whole point.
Some of the
They put
choices-
him in charge to shut it down.
Yeah.
And-
research
and-
that doesn't benefit their political.
That's what we've become now. It doesn't.
No, it's
it's
professional politicians.
It's just continuous sense of one-upsmanship. It's always been there, but at some point in time, back in the day, you had to provide some kind of results for the electorate because they could see through you. They were a bit more. We had less means of information. We didn't have the rapid fire internet stuff we have now, but something about that gap in reading something and digesting it, people made a more informed decision about things.
I think we also had more tendency to think for ourselves back then, rather than be fed an
Amen
ideology by a fucking news, by a TV channel. Than we do now.
Channels.
I think we also
channels. Well, but the reason I make that singular is because most people choose one. Yeah. They don't watch all of them, so they're being told buy a channel.
I don't watch any of them anymore.
Yeah, well, neither do I.
I mean, it's just gotten to the point where you're trying to.
But I mean, what I'm saying is, though,
I'm
I'm not trying to contend that only one side's doing it.
Right.
I'm using the singular because people focus on one, and they don't step outside of that.
That's the big problem, man. Is the age of the internet. We have all this information, all these opportunities to learn, but people are more isolated than they have been in terms of what information they expose themselves to. And more than ever, they're isolated. And that Google News, man, aggregates news that it thinks I'm interested in. And it's like I said on another show, every time I look at the news, there's an article about Bernie Sanders. And to me, it's like, wow, he's the most popular politician in the world.
Right.
And I'm like, no, they're just shoveling this to me because I click on those articles. Yeah. And I don't like that. I want to know who everyone, like who has exposure.
Yeah, show me something about this Rubio guy, because all I know is that he gets a lot of his money from the prison complex, and that makes me nervous.
Well, he's from Florida, so that alone should disqualify him from the presidential race.
Florida or Texas, like either one of those. Forget about it.
But also, people feel
Florida's
less...
like my toe. Like it hurts, and I'm not sure if I still need it.
We're considering chopping it off.
Right? That's where we're at. Florida's like my big toe. Not sure we still need that.
But people feel less connected to the government and politicians than they did back in the past as well.
Yeah,
they don't think really.
Well, because they're not working for us anymore.
Well, they aren't working for us, but I mean, there are still ways that they do work for us.
Yeah.
And even the most, like you guys were saying earlier, even the most anti-government person, there's probably some form of government or some little thing that the government does that they want the government to keep doing in their life.
Except for the most extreme anarchist, even the
most extreme anarchists. I bet you there's something like if the roads got completely torn up, or
a war, we got invaded,
broke out, or whatever. There's something.
Now, I've been trying to define my view of what the government is and should be, and I'm not sure. I keep changing my views every week on the show because I'm in a period of flux. But it's basically the conclusion I've landed on is a sort of semi-socialist capitalist conclusion, which is that what we need capitalism because it stimulates innovation, competition. But the role of the federal government would be to redistribute, it's a bad word, but to redistribute the wealth that inevitably accrues on the 1% in capitalist society. So free market capitalists all have this rosy picture of that it'll all balance out and that a monopoly, will eventually get taken down by a startup because people will want to, or something. The market will work it out, and it's all fairy tale, if you ask me. So my thing is that once capitalism inevitably distributes that wealth towards one end, the role of the government is to redistribute that wealth through taxation on the wealthy and things like the minimum wage, and then creating jobs for infrastructure, the things that Bernie Sanders wants to do. Because, he's a self-described socialist, but he's obviously a capitalist, too. He obviously wants private companies to continue existing.
But show me a government that has, in history, that has ever taken money and then redistributed it to the poor.
Well, they do a little bit, but you're saying they don't really do it.
No, they take it and they keep it for themselves. That's what happens time after time.
Yep.
So
I know. That's why I wanted Bernie to come out and say, here's my plan to, avoid that. But so I have deep doubts about my own political view.
Which I think is healthy.
Yeah.
I think to be sure
is a sign of ignorance.
Yeah.
If you don't have deep doubts,
Hitler was pretty sure.
Yeah. He had no doubts.
Mao Tse-tung was sure. He was absolutely certain.
If you don't have doubt right now, you're not paying attention, or you're woefully uninformed.
Let's hit our last subject here. We're almost at 2 hours. The minimum wage. There's two aspects of this discussion, because there's an ethical question and then there's a math problem. And I like to think of the minimum wage argument as a math problem, one that we can address with economic studies of real things that have happened. We can find out what actually happens when you raise the minimum wage. Does it do more good than bad or not? So that's how I like to look at it. But first, quickly address the ethical side of it. Now, a lot of people you'll hear will say, so our friend Marlon at the Jiu-Jitsu Academy said the other day that he said, yeah, they're talking about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour for people flipping burgers. He's like, I know paramedics that make less than that. What the hell? You know? And I was saying, okay, so that's the ethical argument against it,
Right.
which is like they don't deserve it, is basically what they're saying, that you don't deserve that much money for doing that
But if
work.
you give $15 to the burger flippers, then the paramedics are probably going to be getting at least 20, maybe 25. So everybody's wage goes up.
There's some
Now we're getting
debate
into the
about
math
that,
problem.
but that does tend to happen. But there are also negative effects. So that's a very
No,
good point.
there'll be negative effects about that. But
Right.
I'm just saying, him who's complaining, saying,
Yes.
I know paramedics that make less than that.
Right.
Well, guess what?
You'll
when that
probably
happens,
make
you
more.
won't, because paramedics will be making more than that.
Probably, and we'll get into
yeah.
that in a second. But without just that aside, it's interesting because he doesn't really care about that response. His perspective is that they don't deserve it. He doesn't want them to get it, regardless of what he makes as a paramedic. So, and that's something I can't really agree with. It's like because I'll boil it down to this. I'll talk to the paramedic and I'll say, do you think you earn the right wage for your work? And if they say yes, then the argument's over, right? It's like, well, then don't worry about the burger flipper. Let him get paid $1 million an hour. You're fine. You're getting what you deserve in your own opinion. Now, if he says, no, I don't earn what I deserve for my work, you're focusing on the wrong guy by focusing on the burger flipper.
Certainly.
You should be lobbying for more money for your job, and him making 15 won't hurt you anymore. So that's how I dismantle the ethical, they don't deserve it argument. And the third thing that I use is that I've worked at Burger King. It's not skilled labor, but it's hard. It's hard to work at Burger King. It's horrible to work at Burger King. I worked there full time for a few months in the summer. It was awful. Every day I would dread going in. Eventually I made some friends there and we had a lot of fun. And we did some pranks and crazy crap. but you know, I would go out to lunch. I would have lunch in my car. It was hot New York summer. And I would eat a bacon double cheeseburger and fries every day for 3 months, which is the kind of thing you can get away with at 18. And, you know, it's hard work. And if you ask me, the ethical question, does a person who works at Burger King 40 hours a week deserve to earn a living wage? The answer is yes. In my opinion, they do. It's 40 hours a week, and I believe America should be a place where if you work 40 hours a week, you can support yourself and maybe someone else. In the 1960s, a person working for the minimum wage 40 hours a week could support their entire family. Not very well, but they could do it. And today, the minimum wage in terms of purchasing power and real value, $2 lower than it was in 1960. It has not raised. In fact, it has decreased. So those are problems. There's been a minimum wage for 70 years. Right now, it's $7.25 federal. 23 states have higher than that minimum wage. Only about 1% of the population makes minimum wage. So one big argument is this isn't important. This isn't going to affect a lot of people.
We're in the 99%, John.
Yeah. And that's the real 1%, those minimum wage bastards. So they're saying this really isn't going to affect that many people. But like Walmart says, we only have 6,000 employees that make minimum wage. Yeah, but how many do you have that make 10 cents more? So it's obviously bullshit. So raising that minimum wage will help all the people. There's a big percentage, I contend, that are making...
Yeah, they don't make $7.25, they make $7.50.
Right, they're making less than what the minimum wage would be if we raised it to
But the minimum
$10.10.
wage was made for teenagers entering their first jobs, was it not?
I don't think... Well, first of all, that's not accurate today. 80% of minimum wage workers are 20 or older, and 55% are women, and half of those have children. So,
But you said only 1% of the workforce makes minimum wage.
yeah, but of those, most are not
And
teenagers.
of those, most are not teenagers.
Yeah, 20%.
So most teenagers that are working their first jobs are making more than minimum wage.
Yes, and it's also that there aren't that many teenagers in the workforce, so that there maybe a big percentage of teenagers are making minimum wage, but ultimately it doesn't make up that much of the whole thing of who's making minimum
because
wage.
the jobs that normally teenagers would do, like other people have to do now. It's not a teenager job. It's something that somebody has to fucking do.
I just step back. I was under the impression when they put it together, it was more of a post World War II. We've just come out of the Depression. We've had this massive industrialization for the war, and we've got a mobilized workforce. Now let's keep it going. That's kind of what I thought. That was my impression, and were like 7 decades removed from that, and a different set of realities now.
True.
So
we'll get to the debate in a second, because a few more facts. If the minimum wage were pegged to productivity since 1960, it would be $18.42 an hour, because in other words, average productivity has increased, over time. And if you pegged the wage to productivity, it would be higher. However, that statistic is a little hairy, because that's average productivity of all workers. So not necessarily minimum wage workers have increased their productivity that much. So that's not the best statistic. And I guess one of the part of the ethical question is, should someone who works 40 hours a week at any job be paid a living wage? Because $7.25 isn't enough, isn't a living wage. Also, a huge percentage of those making minimum wage are receiving government benefits. Okay, that's really important. So that when the nonpartisan government agency, the Congressional Budget Office, did a study on this, they found that if you raise the federal minimum wage to $10.10, you'll remove 1.7 million Americans from that category of minimum wage workers receiving welfare or other government benefits, which is, those government benefits are a huge expense. So you'll remove those people from needing or qualifying for those benefits. So you'll save money in that way. Saving, the Congressional Budget Office says $7.6 billion in savings from lifting those people out of the government benefits range. And so, first, let's just get a quick answer around the table. Do you believe that someone in America working 40 hours a week at anything should make what's called a living wage? Richter?
Yeah.
Mark?
If they're good at their job.
In other words, if they're good enough not to get fired, right?
If they're good enough not to get fired, or they're good at their job, because there's plenty of people that have jobs that I have no idea why they still have jobs.
I'm with you on that.
And I think they should maybe be living in the streets and not be in an apartment. You know what I mean? Like, there's...
You should have to represent for your money. I'll say that. Like, if you're going to show up to work and just do fucking nothing, then you probably shouldn't even have a job at all. But if you're going to carry your weight and you're going to work hard for 40 hours,
you're going to do
because I've worked jobs, 40-hour jobs.
Machine.
I've had 40-hour jobs that paid shit. I couldn't get by. I was starving, man. I was depending on my friends.
Yeah, my answer was not about, like, I feel the same way about fast food workers as I do cops or politicians or anybody. So it's not.
Yeah,
I wasn't attacking
some
lower job.
Mr. Varble.
By saying that.
Is that not a fair way of painting things?
That I felt like a
lead.
There's a leading question from the defense attorney.
It was.
What I want.
Do you think someone flipping burgers 40 hours a week should make a living wage, which is pegged to somewhere around $10 to $12 an hour?
I think you should be able to get a full-time job and live on it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many factors influencing that shouldn't exist. And I think that when we look at minimum wage, we're looking at it like it's a silver bullet that's going to
fix
bring
everything
them up. And it doesn't. It's tied. And we look at it on a macroeconomic scale. It seems like, man, these numbers are clear. It's black and white. This stuff can work. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it on a microeconomic scale, when you have a minimum wage for someone that works for McDonald's, it's not the same impact on that business as it is for Brian's taco truck. And I'm starting up here in Tucson.
And I have to pay my
30% of my profit doesn't go to me. Let's break it up. 30% of my profit goes to renting space. So another 30% goes to paying my workers. Another 30% goes to buying my materials that I market, and 10% is what I live on. So when it's time to up that 30% that I pay as wages to 35%. Well, where's that other 5% come from? Am I going to buy lower quality materials that I'm marketing? I certainly got to pay my rent. My landlord's not going to be flexible on that. Or it can come out of my hide. So now I might get in the situation, well, yeah, I'm paying all my workers minimum wage. I'm not even making minimum wage anymore, and I own the business.
Right.
And those are real...
So now we're into the math problem.
Well, and also
we're
don't
saying,
forget-
does it help? Because if it destroys these, if that guy can't make money, he'll close the taco shop. Those guys lose their jobs.
But this is where it comes down to things like budget plans, or budget, business plans, marketing. What happens in San Antonio, Texas that doesn't happen in Boulder, Colorado? And what's the impact here in this market where I'm drawing from this pool of workers?
Regional.
This is what it costs to live here.
Yeah.
And
like 15 an hour for McDonald's in New York City is very reasonable.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's not. I mean,
Right.
it really
Yeah.
isn't, and it never would be 15 here in Tucson.
Right,
But
right.
so now we're into the math problem. Does it help more people than it hurts, or does it hurt more people than it helps?
And you already have small business, like Brian was saying, Mr. Varble, being hurt by Obamacare. With if you have more than, I think it's 20 employees, then you have to
Provide insurance
for them.
Yeah.
You just nailed it to me. It's
And then on top of that, you have to pay them $15 an hour.
Right.
Like okay, so you only have 3 employees, but then you can't get any bigger. You can't have any
Right.
franchises.
Well,
you
that's-
can't expand. So then you're hurting. You're still like telling the small businessman.
That's why I
"Fuck
think there
you."
should be single payer health care, Medicare for all, so the government pays for it rather than the business.
Certainly, but that's not what we have.
Right.
And
Well,
then my
Obamacare-
other problem with the $15 minimum wage is I don't think it's really the government's business. It's not the government's role to tell everyone else how much they have to pay their employees.
Yeah, but then
That doesn't seem like it's part of government.
But
to
you
me.
realize the purpose for it, which is that if
Realize the
without it, there's
purpose for it,
slave
but-
wages get paid. you know.
But there's slave wages now. I mean,
That's the
people
point,
still
is
get
trying to get
around
rid
it.
of those
People
with
still get around
legislation.
it.
yeah.
Waitresses, bartenders, they're getting paid less.
But most of them make more than the minimum wage.
A friend of mine lives in Colorado Springs. The house next door to him, no one was home. Someone called and said there was a fire there. Well, a couple fire trucks, some paramedics, cops all showed up. No, like as I said, no one's home. They tore the roof off the house to get to this fire that was non-existent. How much an hour do you think any of those cops, firemen, paramedics should be paid an hour? And how much are they worth compared to someone flipping burgers? That's just to the, when people want to compare work and say, oh, well, you shouldn't pay them. I don't think those people have a fucking thought in their head. And I think maybe they should be out on their ass in the street, like I said.
Yeah, I don't think paying firemen less is a good direction to go.
Well, if they don't know how to do their job, they're pulling a roof off your house
but this is
when you don't have a fire.
This is some weird thing that happened, though.
Yes, weird things happen. But I'm just saying,
Okay.
you should know how to do your job. You should be skilled in doing your job. If you can't fulfill the responsibilities that your job is supposed to do, then you should be let go.
Okay. So here's what else the Congressional Budget Office says. They say if you raise the minimum wage to $10.10, you'll help 24.5 million people by raising their wages. That's a lot of Americans. You would hurt 500,000 people because you're going to eliminate several 100,000 jobs. Because the whole idea is if you raise the minimum wage, then jobs where labor is valued less than that will disappear. So jobs where the work is valued at less than that $10 minimum wage, those jobs will disappear because there won't be any, the business won't be able to continue. Now, my view of this is like it's kind of a really cool mix of free market capitalism and socialism, because the whole thing is you raise the minimum wage to a living wage, and then jobs disappear that can't pay their employees that. That's my whole point, is that's the free market in action. Those businesses shouldn't exist if they cannot pay their employees a living wage. That's not a good business model. So taco truck, I'm sorry, you're gone. Another guy who can do his taco truck with just him and one other guy, that guy's going to make it. And that's a good example of like the free market working itself out with a little help from the government.
Well, that's the thing. It's back into the terminology we were using a couple years ago with bailouts and stuff. Picking winners and losers, sort of deal.
We picked the wrong ones at that.
Well, that's the thing.
$1 trillion
At the end of the day, that happens, and those, it should work like that. I mean, you've got to develop a feasible, solid plan that can be executed. But do we want to leverage it in favor? It's not gonna hurt a corporation that has some entity that pays minimum wage. It's not making the market more competitive. It's not. So I mean, it's the bottom line to most of these things we've discussed today is they're very complex.
Yeah.
But they're marketed to us as this
It's
silver
kind of the
bullet.
theme of this whole show,
Yeah.
dude.
Yeah.
There's nothing fucking easy to solve
There's no silver bullet solution. That's how it gets packaged to
to
everybody.
anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Buy your little happy meal
and
of
that's the problem, though. That's why I wanted to just keep coming back here, because that whole radical agnostic line of thinking is like there's no silver bullet, bro. That's
Yeah.
the radical part of it. Like everything right now is being fed to us as a silver bullet.
Yeah.
And what's radical about this way of thinking is that we know, sitting around this table, we realize there's no silver bullet.
You got to
Well,
live
yeah.
in that sticky gray area.
yeah,
Right. And
that's where change happens, in
and the
that
other
sticky,
thing-
shitty gray area.
Yeah.
So the $15 minimum wage, or even just a living
The
wage,
10-10.
Why is it not a living wage now? It's not a living wage because you got to pay so much in rent, you got to pay so much for food, you got to pay so much for
Yeah.
health care, you got to pay so
Well,
much for your kids going to school.
Inflation
gotta pay for
too. Your money is
No,
worth less than it used to.
right, but so if those things you didn't have to pay as much for them, and you're still getting paid whatever you're getting paid now, then it might be a living wage.
Yeah, but
and what
you
I'm
can't-
saying is,
that's much harder
if you raise the minimum wage to this living wage, you don't think prices of stuff are going to go up?
They may.
Think about property taxes. When the government raises property taxes, who pays that?
The homeowners.
The homeowners? What if the homeowners rent to someone else? What if the person that owns the property does not live there, but they rent
They still
to someone
pay it.
else?
So your rent.
Oh, you're
They-
saying they
oh,
raise
they
the rent.
pay
Okay,
it,
okay,
sure,
okay, I get
but
what you're
There's
saying.
a huge cost transfer issue
Yeah,
with
yeah.
it.
It
And
is.
anyone who doesn't think that's going to happen, you raise the minimum wage, and that businesses are going to transfer that over to
Yes.
the customer.
Yeah, it will
is living in some.
It will happen.
dreamland.
The question is to what extent, because Walmart might raise their prices if they have to pay their employees a living wage, but they're not going to raise them above Target's prices, right? Because they don't want to lose market share to Target.
All of them have to pay the same minimum wage, right?
Yeah, but it's going to
So it's
still
like
be a
gas prices.
competition to
How
keep
come
your
gas
price low?
prices? How come when gas prices get jacked up from $2.19 to $2.49 the next week, there's not one gas station out there somewhere that's still at $2.19?
No, they're at 247.
You make a salient point. Another argument, though, in favor of it is that
close.
when you raise the minimum wage, you give those people purchasing power. You give them money to spend, and we all know that low-income people will immediately spend all of the money that you give them, including me. You get a little extra. You're like, okay, I'm going to have a luxury. I'm going to go eat out once a year. So, 58.
Or I'm going to get that thing that I've been putting off because I couldn't fucking afford it for 2 years.
A June 2014 survey finds that 3 out of 5 small businesses owners support increasing the minimum wage to $10.10. 58% of them say raising the minimum wage would increase consumer purchasing power. 56% say raising the minimum wage would help the economy. 53% higher minimum wage businesses would benefit from lower employee turnover, increased productivity, and customer satisfaction. So that's just a survey. That's not, Paul Krugman of Princeton says, now you might argue that even if the current minimum wage seems low, raising it would cost jobs. But there's evidence on that question, lots and lots of evidence, because the minimum wage is highly studied, and because we've raised it a bunch of times so economists can study it. It turns out that minimum wage offers the U.S. has offered many natural experiments in which one state raises its minimum wage while others do not. And while there are dissenters, as there always are, the great preponderance of evidence from these natural experiments points to little, if any, negative effect of minimum wage increases on employment. So that argument that you'll lose jobs, you'll definitely, from the Congressional Budget Office, you will lose jobs. But the point is you'll be helping a lot more people, and you might lose 20,000 jobs, but you're raising 900,000 families above the poverty line from below it. So that's the summary of my research on it. I was biased on that research a little. I didn't. But really, the majority of it seemed to point in that direction, that raising it as a math problem is a good thing. And then the slippery slope argument, well, why not raise it to $50 an hour then? Is legitimate, but the whole point is if you raised it to $50 an hour, you would lose far more jobs than people you would help. You'd lose 50 million
Most
jobs.
of them.
Yeah. So anyway,
Well, raise the minimum wage, legalize drugs, and then the poor people will go to McDonald's to buy the heroin burger
Yeah.
with their easy money they
it'll
just
help
got
the
in their
economy.
pocket.
They're
and,
spending.
Or just get rid of the government.
then-
We'll all go into business for ourselves, and we'll just compete on the market. Right?
Well, and then also the American public won't be complaining anymore about anything because they'll all be eating heroin cheeseburgers at McDonald's.
Yeah.
Well, there's no
Shangri-La.
government now, so who would we complain to anyway? Each other?
Oh, we almost forgot.
Complaining's a circle jerk.
Last night,
Dude.
Levi Escobar, son of our jiu-jitsu instructor Martin Escobar, fought his third amateur mixed martial arts bout at the casino in the Octagon. How long did that fight last, Mr. Varble?
26 seconds.
26? Why so long?
20. I think the guy tied up Levi's hands for a few seconds when he
okay.
tried to clinch with him or something like
So
that.
Levi threw a bomb from the left.
Oh my goodness! So the
mean left hook.
first thing was I've only made it to 2 of Levi's 3 fights. Try to make as many as I can, of course. But the first thing is he started with this, I think it was the Mr. Miyagi high crane kick or something like that. I'm like, what? Where did that come from? And I don't know if the guy was fighting expected it either, but it was neat to see something different.
Yeah.
But you could tell right away that his head movement was different, his footwork was different, and you could tell
His head was up.
Yeah,
He
you're
didn't drop his head at all when
Yeah.
punches came his way. He kept his eyes up.
You're looking at a progression of skill here. Not that Levi doesn't know how to do that, but he's doing it now in the cage
Yeah.
and
Of all
under
the-
combat conditions. And
Of all the competitors there, his jiu-jitsu as a purple belt from our school is probably the best in the room.
I can tell you
And-
just from watching everybody, it was far superior to anyone I saw,
and
even
he
in the pro
didn't
fights.
even use it.
no, that's why I told
Knocked
my
him
wife.
out.
Knocked him out with the
as
left.
The best
Cold.
jiu-jitsu competitor in this building just knocked somebody out. We
Yep.
didn't even get to see his
The only
game.
guy to come out in a gi for sure.
Yep.
And the funny thing is, if you ask around town, we're a jiu-jitsu school, man. We can't strike.
Yeah, that's what they all say.
That's what they all say.
Because
You
we
can
don't
stand
strike
up.
a lot, but
you can
but
stand
we
up
have,
with those guys.
What we have is guys like Martin and Augie and stuff
Yeah.
who are knowledgeable strikers and they can
Well,
train our
he's
guys.
been training with Chris Valdez for striking too.
Him too.
Who's a stud, and you could really see it. Like he slip punches and set up that left hook
Yeah.
really nice, and he hit that kid
He
hard.
just went down like a sack of
Well, he
bricks.
just you see all the fighters come out of the back, and that kid just never came out. And then I heard later that he was getting stitches and had a concussion. Probably went to the hospital.
Yeah.
It was I mean, I've watched boxing since I was a kid. Been following MMA for quite some time, and it was a beautiful knockout. I mean, you see cool fights, you see cool finishes, but I mean, it was a beautiful Rocky Marciano smacking Jersey Joe Walcott. Ali coming off the rope-a-dope on Foreman. I mean, it was a beautiful knockout. It was beautiful to watch.
I don't think he'll be on the amateur card a whole lot longer.
Probably not.
He's going to the UFC.
I think
I-
the
couple
MGM
years.
Grand Garden Arena. I really like watching fights there. I'm looking forward to seeing Levi there
Yeah.
one day. I think we're going to see him we're going to run into each other in the stands at the MGM or at
so.
Mandalay and be like, "Yeah, I'm here for."
He
like-
won't be talking
You
to
mean
us anymore by
No,
then.
he won't. Yeah,
Hey, I knew that
we
kid.
might get an invite to the after party,
Yeah.
maybe.
He used to beat me up when he was 16.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he was a lot easier to deal with when he was
Oh, my
9.
goodness.
All right, guys, that's it. That's the Radical Agnostic episode 21. We'll be back next Sunday with more awesome stuff and talk and things. Mr. Varble, thank you so much.
Thank you
It was
very
one of
much.
our best episodes ever. I think we all learned something today, folks.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
Right on.
We'll see you guys next Sunday.